There is a moment that stops a room full of people. Every time. In every country. In every century. Two people stand facing each other. Everyone else goes quiet. And someone says the old words out loud. For better. For worse. For richer. For poorer. Till death. Watch the guests at any wedding when those words are spoken. The cynics go still. The divorced go still. The children stop fidgeting without knowing why. Something enters the room in that moment. Something older than the building. Older than the language. And every human being in the chairs can feel it arrive. The Greeks knew what it was. They knew its name. You know her name too, though you probably remember it wrong. You remember a jealous wife, the angry queen from the old stories, the villain in every tale about Zeus, the goddess who punished the innocent because she could not punish her husband. That is the version that survived in the paintings and the cartoons and the paperback myths. Almost nobody knows the rest of it. They don't know about the little girl who grew up in the dark, inside her own father, and what that darkness taught her. They don't know about the wedding night that lasted 300 years, or the 100 eyes she sewed into a peacock's tail, or the night she led a rebellion against the king of the universe and nearly won. They don't know that the month of June is hers, that the word money was born in her temple, or that right now, tonight, while you are getting comfortable, a spacecraft carrying her name is circling the largest planet in the sky, doing the one thing she spent 4,000 years doing, looking through the clouds of Jupiter, trying to see what is really happening underneath. She was the goddess of marriage, married to the one being in the universe who broke every vow he ever made. She guarded the promise. She lived inside the broken one. And she stayed. This is the story of what staying cost her. Get comfortable. Let your breathing slow down. The palace is open tonight. The long stairs. The tall doors. The throne room, where a queen has been waiting 4,000 years for someone to hear her side of it. We're going in. Do something for me before this chapter begins. Notice the darkness of the room you are lying in. The shapes you can barely make out. The furniture. The window. The thin light under the door. Even now, in the middle of the night, your world is full of edges and outlines. There is always a little light coming in from somewhere. Now imagine the darkness with nothing in it. No window. No door. No under the door. A darkness so complete that your eyes invent colors just to have something to do. Imagine that darkness is not a place you are visiting. Imagine it is the only world you have ever known. That is where she grew up. To see how a child ends up in a place like that, you have to meet her father. And her father was Cronus, king of the Titans, lord of everything, and the most frightened being in the universe. His fear had a shape and a schedule. A prophecy had come to him years before. In the way prophecies always come, uninvited and impossible to unhear. One of your children will overthrow you. That was the whole message. One of them will do to you what you did to your own father. A different kind of king might have raised his children carefully, watched them, loved them into loyalty. Cronus was the other kind. Cronus decided the safest child was a child that never got the chance to grow. So, every time his wife Rhea placed a newborn in his arms, he looked at it for a moment, and then he swallowed it whole. I want to be careful here, because this is a bedtime story, and I intend to keep it one. And also because the old poets themselves were careful. The children were gods. Gods cannot die, so they did not die. That is the mercy of this story and also the horror of it, because it means the swallowed children remained, down in the dark, inside their father, alive, aware, and growing. The first was a daughter named Hestia, then Demeter, then a third daughter, and this one is ours, Hera, then two sons after her. Hades and Poseidon, arriving one by one into the black. Each new child, a new small voice in a place with no morning. Think about what a childhood is made of, and then take each piece away. No sky. She would rule the sky one day, and she spent her entire childhood without ever seeing one. No mother. Rhea was out there somewhere, on the other side of the world's worst wall, and the children knew her only as a memory of hands, a warmth that had held them for a few minutes and then let go. No days, nothing to count, nothing to wait for, only the dark and the sound of a father's enormous heart beating on and on above them like a drum in a sealed room, and the company of brothers and sisters she could hear but never clearly see. Here is the strange thing, and it is the first truly important thing in her whole story. Somebody grew up down there anyway. Children do that. It is the most stubborn talent our kind of creature has. And the gods, in the old stories, had it too, in the dark, with nothing. The swallowed children became themselves, and the one called Hera, the third daughter, became the one who held the others together. The old accounts don't give us scenes from inside. No poet ever dared write them, but they show us who walked out, and you can read a childhood backwards from the adult it produced. She walked out organized. She walked out with a spine like a column of marble. She walked out as someone who had learned, before she ever saw a sunrise, that the universe can take absolutely everything from you. Your light, your mother, your name, your years. And there is exactly one thing it cannot take unless you hand it over. Your dignity, the way you carry yourself in the dark. Hold on to that. It explains almost everything she does for the next 4,000 years. Now, if you have traveled with us before, you have watched a goddess be born the other way. You stood on a pale beach at Delos while a firstborn daughter arrived in the open air, with the sea wind on her skin and the whole sky overhead, free from her first breath, so free that at 3 years old she would climb her father's knee and negotiate for even more of it. Keep that picture beside this one. One goddess born into all the open country of the world, and one goddess born into a swallowing. Everything those two would ever become is already sitting in that difference. The rescue, when it finally came from the child who got away. Rhea, on her 6th pregnancy, had done the arithmetic of her grief and decided the count would stop at 5. When the baby came, a boy, she wrapped a stone in the blankets instead, and Cronus, trusting and terrible, swallowed the stone, and the real child was smuggled away to a cave on the island of Crete, where he grew up in secret, nursed on wild honey and goat's milk, waiting. His name was Zeus. Years later, a young stranger arrived at the court of Cronus and found a way to slip something into the king's cup. The old accounts differ on the details and agree completely on the result. The king's body rebelled, and everything he had ever swallowed came back up. And it came in reverse order. The stone first, then the sons, then the daughters, un by un, walking out of the dark and into the assault of daylight. Hera came out near the end, which means she had been down there among the longest of them all. Picture her first minute, because it matters more than any other minute in this story. A grown goddess now. The dark years finished all at once, standing in light so loud it must have felt like sound. The first colors she had ever seen. The first sky. The first wind on her face. And standing in front of her, the very first face her eyes ever truly focused on, was the little brother who had never been swallowed. The free one. The rescuer. The stranger she owed everything to and knew not at all. Zeus. Remember that. The first thing Artemis ever saw was her mother's pain, and it made her run from the world of men forever. The first thing Hera ever clearly saw was Zeus, wearing the light, holding the door of the world open for her. One goddess spent her life running from that door. The other walked through it, straight toward him, and never found her way back out. But the wedding is still far away tonight. First came the war, 10 years of it. The young gods against the old titans, mountains thrown like stones, the sky on fire, and while her brothers fought it, Hera was sent somewhere safe, to the far edge of the world, to be raised the rest of the way by an old married couple. Their names were Oceanus and Tethys, the ancient god and goddess of the great river that circled the earth. And here the tradition kept a small detail that almost nobody retells, and it might be the saddest, gentle fact in her whole biography. Oceanus and Tethys were faithful, in a mythology soaked in betrayal, in a family tree that reads like a police report. Those two old water gods simply loved each other, quietly, for ages beyond counting. That was the house where Hera finished growing up. Calm water, kept promises, two beings who had chosen each other once and never looked away. So understand what she carried into her own future. People say Hera defended marriage the way zealots defend a theory. That is wrong. She defended it the way you defend something you have actually seen. She had lived inside the best marriage in the universe. She knew it was possible. She knew exactly what it looked like, sounded like, felt like across a dinner table. She spent the rest of eternity married to the opposite, and she could never once say she didn't know the difference. The war ended. The Titans fell. Her father went down into the deepest prison there is, and the universe got new management. And word went out across the waters and the mountains that the world was safe now, and the daughters of Rhea could come home. She had escaped her father's darkness. She was one of the 6 rulers of everything. She was, by every account we have, the most beautiful goddess of her generation, and the most self-possessed, the one who had walked out of the dark with her head level and her spine straight. She did not know yet that the universe had other ways of swallowing a woman, slower ways, brighter ones. Some of them wear crowns, some of them arrive as love, and one of them, on a mountainside in the rain, was about to arrive as a small, shivering bird. Before we get to the wedding, I want to take you somewhere real. Leave the myths alone for a few minutes. Come stand instead in the low hills of the Argolid, in southern Greece. On an actual hillside you could visit next summer if you wanted to. The plain of Argos spreads out below, olive groves and farmland running down toward the sea. And the light in the early morning does that thing it only does in Greece, where every stone seems lit from slightly inside. There are ruins on this hillside, terraces of pale limestone, the stumps of columns, the outline of something that was once enormous. Archaeologists have been working this ground for more than a century, brushing the soil away layer by layer, reading the earth downward like the pages of a book. And the deeper they go on this particular hill, the older the worship gets, back past the classical age, back past the poets, back into centuries so early that writing itself was still a rumor. This was the Herion of Argos, her house, one of the oldest great sanctuaries in all of Greece. And here is the detail that should stop you. The reason we climbed this hill before we attended any wedding. The people of this plain were building monumental terraces for Hera when the famous temples of Zeus were not yet even an idea. At Olympia itself, the sanctuary where the Olympic Games were born. The Games held in the name of Zeus. The oldest temple standing on the sacred grounds was not his. It was hers. The temple of Hera at Olympia went up generations before the great temple of Zeus rose beside it. For a long stretch of years, anyone walking into the holiest athletic sanctuary of the Greek world walked past the queen's house first, because the king didn't have one yet. Now sail east with me, across the Aegean, to the island of Samos, a few miles off the coast of what is now Turkey. Warm water, low green mountains, and near the shore, in a riverside meadow, a single marble column standing alone against the sky. One column. It has become the postcard of the island, and tourists photograph it without always knowing what it was. It was the Heraion of Samos, and in its day it was one of the largest temples the Greek world ever attempted. A forest of more than 100 columns, so vast that when the historian Herodotus saw it with his own eyes, a man who had seen Egypt, a man who had seen Babylon, he called it one of the greatest building projects in all the Greek lands. The islanders said Hera herself had been born on Samos, on that riverbank, under a willow tree. The willow was still there in historical times. Priests would show it to visitors. Here, they said, the Queen of Heaven was born right here. And underneath the marble, down in the deepest layers, the archaeologists found something older, simpler altars, earlier shrines, offerings going back and back, to a time before the great myths were ever written down. People had been bringing gifts to a goddess on that riverbank for a very, very long time. So let me say carefully what the stones seem to say, and let me say it the way the careful scholars say it, because nobody alive knows this for certain. Some historians have long suspected that Hera is older than her marriage, that on the Greek mainland and the islands, long before the poets organized the sky into one royal family, there were people whose greatest goddess was a queen, a power of the land, of women's lives, of sovereignty itself, and that when the new order arrived, the order with the thunder god at the top of it, she was too large to erase and too beloved to demote. So the stories did the only thing stories could do with a queen like that. They married her to the new king. I cannot prove that to you, and I won't pretend to. What I can tell you is what is beyond argument. Her sanctuaries are among the oldest and largest in the Greek world. Her worship runs deeper into the soil than almost anyone else's, and in the myths themselves, if you read them slowly, something odd keeps showing up. Zeus needs her in a way he needs no one else. Her approval matters. Her anger matters. The other gods scatter when he thunders, but she stands there and argues with him, in front of everyone, again and again, like someone withstanding, like someone whose position was never entirely his to give. The poets remembered her as the wife of the king. The oldest stones in Greece remember something else. They remember that she came first. Hold that in your hand tonight the way you would hold a coin found in the dirt, because everything you are about to watch happened to her. The courtship, the deceptions, the long humiliations in front of the whole sky. All of it happens to a goddess who once, maybe, in the deep morning of that world, had a throne with nobody sitting beside it. She would never have that again. The last thing to see before we leave the hillside is down in the valley. Smoke from the morning fires of Argos town. People waking, eating, arguing, marrying. Her people. In all the centuries her great house stood on this terrace. They climbed this hill with their gifts on the days of her festival, and the gift the poor ones brought, the ones who could not afford gold or woven cloth, was the simplest thing in the world. Apples, they brought her apples. Remember that too. We will see an apple again before this story is over, and it will cost the world a war. But first, at last, there is a wedding to attend, and, like so many weddings, it began with weather. It started with rain. There is a mountain near Argos that the Greeks would later rename in honor of what happened on it. And on the day this chapter happens, A young goddess has climbed it to be alone. Picture her there, the third daughter of Rhea, grown now. The war over. The world new. She is sitting on the high slopes with the whole green plain below her. And the spring sky is doing what spring skies do, building tall silver clouds out over the gulf. And the first drops are starting to come down, fat and cold, hitting the stones, one at a time. She does not run for shelter. She grew up without weather. Rain still amazes her. That detail is mine. The old accounts don't say it. But sit with her childhood for a moment and tell me it isn't true. By now you should know something else about her, because the whole sky knew it. The new king wanted her. Zeus had noticed his sister the way he noticed everything he wanted, completely, and with the calm confidence of someone who had never in his existence been refused. He was the lord of everything now. He had ended the war, freed the swallowed, remade the world. Goddesses and nymphs and mortal women looked at him the way the earth looks at the sun. He asked, and Hera said no. Stop there, because, in the entire mythology, that word almost never gets said to Zeus, and it never gets said twice. She said it. She was the one being in the universe with the standing to say it and the spine to mean it. The girl who had walked out of the dark with her dignity intact and had no intention of handing it to the first king who reached for it. She knew exactly what he was. She had watched him from the day of her rescue, watched the wanting in him, watched how quickly beautiful things agreed with him, whatever her heart did around him, and the old stories hint that it did plenty. Her answer stayed no. She wanted to be chosen properly or not at all. She wanted, and here is that word again, the vow, the public one, the real one, not to be one more conquest in a growing list, but to be the queen, or nothing. He could not have her by asking. He would not take her by force. Not this one. Not the sister whose approval somehow mattered to his new order more than he could explain. So the king of the universe sat down and studied the one target he could not simply overwhelm, and he found the door into her. The door was her kindness. On the mountain, the rain arrives in earnest now, and out of that grey sky comes a little bird, a cuckoo, storm-blown and soaked to the skin, tumbling more than flying, and it lands, shivering, almost at her feet, a small grey wreck of feathers. It looks half dead. It looks up at her, and Hera, the survivor of the dark, the future queen of heaven, does the thing that tells you who she actually was before the world got to her. She gathers the freezing bird up off the wet stone, and she folds it against her chest to warm it, and she bends her head over it to keep the rain off. The bird stopped shivering, and then the bird began to change. The weight of it grew in her arms. The grey feathers poured away like water, and she found herself holding and being held by the king of the gods himself, wearing his own face now. The storm above them, his storm. The whole trap sprung in the time. It takes a kind heart to make one kind decision. The old accounts handle the next moments with care, and so will I. What matters, what the rest of eternity turns on, is what she did when the shock passed. She stood back from him on that streaming mountainside, and she named her price. The same price as always. The vow, marriage, real marriage, in front of every god that breathed, with her as queen of heaven, his equal at the head of the world, or he could keep his storms and his shapes and his tricks forever. And Zeus, who could have anything, agreed to the one arrangement that would bind even him. The poets never quite agree on why. Maybe it was love, the genuine article, as close as his nature could come to it. Maybe he understood that a king is just a warlord until a queen makes him a kingdom. Probably it was both, tangled together, the way it usually is. But notice, and hold this gently, what the courtship itself had just taught her. The first time her husband ever touched her, he was wearing a disguise. Her marriage began with a deception aimed at the exact center of the best thing in her, her mercy. That was the foundation stone. Everything else got built on top of it. The wedding, though, even knowing everything that comes later, the wedding deserves its page. The Greeks called it the hero's gamos, the sacred marriage, and they believed the whole world attended. It was held, some said, in the garden of the gods, at the western edge of the earth, in the golden hour of the world's own evening. Every river, God came, every nymph of every mountain, every power of sea and sky and grain and fire, all of them climbing toward the light with gifts in their hands. The seasons wove the garlands, the Graces dressed the bride, and Gaia, the deep old earth herself, the great-grandmother of everything, brought the gift that outshone them all. She caused a tree to grow at the edge of the garden, right there, during the ceremony, a tree with dark leaves and golden apples, apples of actual gold, alive and growing, a wedding present for the queen. Hera loved it beyond all her other gifts, and she planted it in her own garden in the far west, and set a serpent that never sleeps to guard it. And there it stood, glowing quietly at the edge of the world, down all the ages of this story. Remember the tree. I will not tell you why yet. Just keep it growing somewhere in the back of your mind, gold among green leaves, in the long light of the west. And then, because gods do nothing on a human scale, came the wedding night. The accounts are unanimous on the number, and I am going to give it to you straight. The honeymoon of Zeus and Hera, on the island of Samos, hidden inside a cloud of gold, lasted 300 years. 300 years. Say it slowly. Longer than the entire history of the United States, spent inside a single golden fog on a warm island. Just the two of them, while the world got along without its rulers, whatever else this marriage would become. It began as the longest honeymoon in the history of existence, and no one made them do it. And the poets record no complaints from inside the cloud. I need you to believe in those 300 years. This whole story needs you to. It would all be so much easier if the marriage had been cold from the start. A pure political arrangement. A cage from day one. Then she could simply be a prisoner, and he could simply be a jailer, and none of what follows would cut the way it cuts. The truth is worse and realer than that. The good years happened. The gold cloud happened. She knew, from 3 centuries of mornings, exactly what his love felt like when it was aimed entirely at her. Every betrayal that is coming will land on a woman who remembers all of it. That is what betrayal is. When you get down to the bone of it, it is memory, being used against you. One more image, and then this chapter can sleep. In the years after the wedding, when the new queen chose the creature that would walk beside her, the way the owl walks with Athena and the deer runs with Artemis, she passed over the eagles and the lions, all the obvious royalty of the animal world, and chose a bird that struts and shimmers and drags a fan of green and gold behind it like a train. The peacock, and if you have ever seen one spread that tail, you know what blooms across it when it opens. Eyes, 100 eyes, wide and unblinking, watching in every direction at once. When she chose it, it was just beauty. The eyes in those feathers were only patterns, only light doing tricks on light. One day, they would be something else. One day, she would owe that bird a debt, and pay it in a currency no queen should ever have to carry. And after that day, no one in the ancient world could look at a peacock's open tail without feeling slightly watched. But that day needs a stranger to arrive first, a girl from the river country of Argos, with a gentle face and terrible luck, whose only crime, like the cuckoo's, was being noticed. The gold cloud has thinned by then. The 300 years are over. The king is looking down from the mountain again, at the whole world at once, and in the queen's own city, in the queen's own temple. One of the queen's own priestesses is about to catch his eye. If you have traveled with us before, you have been inside this room, a small house on the edge of a Greek town. Late at night, an oil lamp burning low, a girl of 15 sitting on the floor with a wooden box open in front of her, taking out her childhood, one object at a time. The cloth doll with the worn face, the leather ball, the spinning top, a lock of her own hair, cut by her own hand. Tomorrow morning she gets married, and tonight she is sorting everything she has ever been into a small pile for the altar. We stood in this room together once, in another story, and we watched her through the window, and when the lamp went out, we stayed on the childhood side of the door. The altar, where she left the doll, belonged to Artemis, the keeper of girlhood, and that story was about the country behind this girl. Tonight, for the first time, we go with her. Tonight, we walk through the door on the other side. Morning comes. The house fills with voices, aunts and cousins and neighbors, and the smell of bread and crushed herbs. And somebody is singing already. The girl is bathed in water, carried from a sacred spring, and dressed. And dressed is a small word for what happens to her, layer by layer. The finest cloth her family owns, and then the veil goes over her, covering her face entirely, and from inside it, the whole world becomes a bright blur of shapes and singing. She rides to her new life at evening, in a cart between her husband and his closest friend, through streets lined with torches. People come out of their doorways to watch. Children run alongside. There are nuts and dried figs thrown like rain, and songs with her name suddenly inside them. And the whole town, for one night, arranges itself around the fact of her. And then comes the moment the entire day has been circling. In the new house, in front of the gathered families, with the torches still burning, the bride reaches up, or her husband does. The custom varied town by town, and the veil is lifted. The Greeks had a word for that exact moment, the anacalypteria, the unveiling. It was the hinge of the whole ceremony, the point past which everything was real, because this was the first time the two of them looked at each other plainly, face to face, husband and wife, with both families watching it happen. Gifts were given for that moment specifically, not for the feast, not for the songs, for the look. Every wedding in the Greek world had a moment like that, and every one of those moments, every lifted veil in every torchlit room for 1,000 years, belonged to one goddess. This was her kingdom. We have spent 4 chapters in her story. This is what she was for. The Greeks did not pray to Hera, mainly out of fear of her temper. Whatever the myths say, they lived with her the way you live, with the load-bearing walls of your house. Look at the calendar of Athens. The deep winter month, the one that sits where our January sits, was called Gamelion, the marriage month, named for her rites. And it was the favorite season for weddings in the ancient world the way June is in ours. A whole month of the year, renamed for what she guarded. Look at her titles, because the Greeks collected them carefully, and 3 of them, taken together, say something no other Olympian could say. In her sanctuaries, she was worshipped as Hera Pais, Hera, the girl, and as Hera Teleia, Hera, the fulfilled, the married one, the completed, and in some places, quietly, as Hera Kera, which means the woman alone, the widow, the separated one, girl, wife, woman, alone, all three, in one goddess. She held the entire arc of a woman's life inside herself. The country before the veil, the country after it, and the cold third country that nobody chooses. A girl belonged to Artemis until the morning of the wedding, from the lifted veil onward, through everything that followed, for better and for worse. In the oldest sense those words have, she belonged to Hera. The goddess of marriage was never just the goddess of weddings. Weddings are a day. She was the goddess of what comes after the guests go home. And that word teleia deserves one more breath, because it hides the deepest thing the Greeks believed about all this. It comes from telos, which means completion, the end a thing is aimed at. To their minds, marriage was the telos of a life, the rite that finished a person, the way a roof finishes a house. You can argue with them across the centuries if you like, but grant them this: they did not give the guardianship of that completion to a goddess with an easy marriage. They gave it to Hera. They looked at the Queen of Heaven, whose own husband was the most famous vow-breaker in the universe, and they said, "She is the one who understands what these promises weigh. Nobody guards a border better than the one who knows exactly where it breaks." Her worship was full of things like that, small rituals with long shadows, and I want to show you two of them before this chapter sleeps, because you will need both later. The first is at Nauplia, near Argos, where a spring called Canathos ran cold out of the rocks, once every year. The tradition says the image of Hera was carried down from her temple and bathed in that spring, and the belief attached to the rite was this: each year, in that water, Hera was made new. Whatever the year had been, whatever had been done, whatever had been endured, whatever the whole sky had watched her suffer, she went into the water, carrying it, and came out clean, restored, entirely herself again, the way she was at the very beginning, every single year. The women of Argos kept that appointment for centuries. Think of them walking down to the water in procession, carrying their queen to the spring, year after year. And ask yourself what they understood about her that the myths were too busy to say. They knew what her marriage was. Everyone knew. The stories were sung at their own festivals. And their answer, the answer they built into ritual and repeated every year of their lives, was a bath in cold water and a fresh start. She renews. She grieves like anyone, rages like anyone, and then she goes down to the water, and she comes back whole, and she puts the crown back on. Hold on to Canathos, near the end of our story. You will want it. The second thing is at Olympia, and it is my favorite fact in her whole worship. Everyone knows the Olympic Games, the runners, the wreaths, the flame that still gets carried around the world every 4 years. Men's Games, held for Zeus. What almost nobody knows is that Olympia held a second festival, the Heraia, the Games of Hera, and the athletes were girls, unmarried girls, in 3 age groups, racing on the same sacred ground, wearing short tunics, their hair loose down their backs. The winners received crowns of olive and a share of the sacred feast, and they had the right, listen to this, to dedicate statues of themselves at Olympia with their names inscribed. Some traditions hold that the girls' races were the older custom of the two. Whether or not that is true, stand at the finish line for a moment. Loose hair, bare feet hitting the dust, a crowd roaring for a 15-year-old girl in the holiest sanctuary in Greece, in the name of the goddess of the veil. She was the guardian of the married state, the most bound and settled condition the ancient world had. and her own games were girls running as fast as they could, free as anything alive. Both things were true. She held both. She always held both. The wall and the wildness behind it. The vow and the girl who had not yet made it. Maybe that is the realest thing about her kingdom, and the part the myths never quite forgave her for. She knew exactly what the veil weighed, because she wore one too. The lamp is guttering in the little house. The families have gone home. The torches are out. The town is asleep. And, in the dark of the new house, a girl who was sorting toys on the floor last night lies listening to the breathing of a stranger she is now bound to for life. Somewhere at the edge of the room, if the old women were right, her presence stands watch over the promise that was made tonight. Fond, formal, wide awake. She kept that watch at every marriage in the Greek world. Every vow spoken under torches was filed in her keeping. Every lifted veil happened under her eyes. And she guarded the whole vast web of human promises with a jealousy the poets mistook for a character flaw, when it was simply her job description. And then she would go home, back up the long stairs of Olympus, to the one promise in the universe that was hers. We are done with the peaceful chapters now. I told you at the start that this is the story of what staying cost her, and the cost begins on the next page. It begins in her own city of Argos, in her own temple on the hillside we stood on, with a young priestess lighting the morning fires. Her name was Io, and the king of the gods was watching her. Come down to the river country below Argos, in the flat green land where the cattle graze, and look at what everyone else is looking at. There is a cow standing apart from the herd, a white one, white all over, without one dark hair on her, and so beautiful, if that word can hold a farm animal, that people stop on the road to stare. She is not grazing. She stands very still, facing away from the others, and as you come closer, you see the thing that the herdsman in this story could never unsee. She is crying, actual tears, sliding down the long white face, one after another, from eyes that are far too human. Cattle do not weep. Everyone who lives near cattle knows that. This one weeps, quietly, steadily, like someone who has been doing it for a while and has given up expecting it to help. Inside the white cow is a girl named Io, and she remembers everything. You have met this kind of horror before. If you have traveled with us, a mind left intact inside a changed body, a person locked behind an animal's eyes. It is the cruelest move in the whole Greek playbook, and this story is where it lands, on someone who did nothing at all. Let me take you back a few weeks and tell it in order. Io was a priestess of Hera. Slow down on that. Of all the young women in all the towns of Greece, the girl this story happens to served in the queen's own sanctuary at Argos, the great house on the hillside from 2 chapters ago. Her days were the queen's days. She swept the queen's floors, tended the queen's fires, carried the queen's offerings. When Zeus looked down from the mountain and let his eye stop on a girl, the girl he chose was standing inside his wife's own house. The old poets never say whether he did that on purpose. I will not guess. I will only say that in 4,000 years of these stories, his wanting never once checked the address. He came to her in dreams first. The accounts say, whispers at night, promises, the attention of heaven pressing on a country girl who had never asked for it. She told her father, who sent to the oracles in fear, and the answers that came back were the kind no father can obey calmly. Turn your daughter out of the house, they said, or worse will come. However, the human details arranged themselves. The end of it was Io alone in the meadows, away from every protecting wall, exactly where the king of the gods wanted her. A god, and on the day it happened, the sky did something strange. Hera was on Olympus, doing whatever queens of heaven do in the middle of an ordinary morning, when she looked down and saw that a piece of the world had gone missing. A single dense cloud, black as a lid, sat on the land near Argos, on a day with no weather in it, sunshine on every side, one patch of manufactured midnight, parked exactly where nobody could see into it. Here is the moment worth slowing for, because every married person in the audience already understands it. She did not see her husband do anything. She saw a hiding. She looked at one wrong cloud on a clear day, and she knew. The way, you know, when a voice on the phone is half a beat too casual. The way you know, from a receipt, from a silence, from a door closed at the wrong hour. The proof was not the deed. The proof was the cover. She came down from the mountain like weather herself, and the black cloud tore open, and there stood her husband, the Lord of the Sky, looking exactly as relaxed as a man can look while standing in a field for no reason. And beside him, where a girl had been a heartbeat before, stood a white cow. He had felt his wife coming, and in the last instant he had hidden the evidence by changing its shape. The girl was gone. There was only this animal, white and trembling and lovely, pretending along with him, because what else could she do? What happened next is one of the coldest and most brilliant scenes in the whole mythology, and not one drop of blood gets spilled in it. Hera looked at the cow. She looked at her husband, and instead of accusing him, instead of tears or thunder, she smiled, and she admired the animal, and she asked him for it. What a beautiful creature. Give her to me, husband, as a gift. Feel the trap close. It is perfect. If he refuses, he confesses. Why would the king of the gods fight to keep one farm animal, unless the animal was not an animal? If he agrees, he hands his wife the girl. Zeus stood in that meadow, the most powerful being in existence, and discovered that his options had been quietly reduced to two, and both of them were hers. All her power in this marriage would have to live in moves like this one, and you are watching her learn it. He handed over the cow. Of course he did. His secrets always outranked his loves. Io learnt that about him before Greece did. So now the queen owned the question. What does a wife do with the girl, when the girl is the only one she can reach? Hold that thought, because this chapter will end inside it. What Hera did first was make sure her husband could never come back to finish what he had started. She needed a guard no trick could get past. No disguise could fool. No darkness could blind. She had one. His name was Argus. The old stories describe him simply and let your skin do the rest. Argent, born of the old earth, loyal to the queen, and covered in eyes, 100 of them, scattered over his head and body, and they took their rest in shifts. When 50 eyes closed in sleep, 50 stayed open and watching. There was no hour of the night, no angle of approach, no moment in any day when all of Argus was asleep. He was the one sentinel in the universe who could not be snuck past, and Hera set him over the white cow. And for a while, the king of the gods was locked out of his own crime scene. Picture the strange, sad guardianship that followed. The meadow by the river, the white cow grazing, weeping her human tears, and always, on the rock above her, the huge, patient shape of the watcher, eyes opening and closing across his skin in their slow rotation, like windows in a city at night. Zeus could not approach, so he sent Hermes, the cleverest of the gods, the talker, the trickster, the one who could sell shadows to the night. Hermes came disguised as a wandering herdsman with a set of pipes, and he sat down near the giant, and he began to play. And then, between tunes, he began to talk. He told stories, long ones, slow ones, stories designed like slow water. Story after story after story, hour after hour, each one a little heavier in the middle, un by un, in ones and twos, scattered across that enormous body. The 100 eyes began to close. When the last eye shut, Hermes killed him. The accounts make it quick. A stone, or the sword. Stroke. The watchman of the queen died in his sleep at the bottom of a story. The only way he could die. And the meadow stood unguarded. And somewhere on Olympus, 100 windows went dark all at once, and Hera felt it happen. She could not bring him back. Gods cannot undo death. That door swings one way even for them. You have heard that law before in these stories, and it does not bend. So the Queen of Heaven came down to the meadow where her guardian lay, and she did the only thing left to do, and it is the reason you have already seen this chapter's ending. Tonight, in a zoo, in a park, on a screen, somewhere, she gathered his 100 eyes, and she set them into the tail of her own bird, the peacock, into those feathers where you and I were told, 2 chapters ago, that the eyes were only patterns, only light playing tricks on light. Not anymore. Now they were a payment, a pension for the watchman who died on her watch. Keeping her watch, she spread them across the peacock's train where they would be carried, fanned open, displayed in glory until the end of the world. 100 eyes that would never close again, because they would never sleep again. The most beautiful thing in the bird world is a funeral. It has been one for 4,000 years. Every peacock you will ever see is still carrying the queen's grief and the queen's debt. And now you know why. And I am sorry, because you will never entirely unsee it. And Io got the worst of it, because in this family the worst always rolled downhill. With Argus gone, Hera's protection became Hera's pursuit. She sent a gadfly, one small, relentless, stinging thing, to follow the white cow wherever she went. And Io ran. She ran out of the meadow, out of Argos, out of Greece. She ran along the coasts and swam the straits. The sea at the edge of Europe where she crossed into Asia took its name from her crossing. The Bosphorus, the Oxford, the place the cow passed over. And it is called that tonight. Ships full of tourists sail it every day, between Europe and Asia, through the middle of Istanbul. Across the wake of a running girl, she ran through lands that would be named for her passing, driven mile after mile, month after month, a priestess locked in an animal, punished across 2 continents for the crime of being seen by the wrong pair of eyes. It ended, finally, in Egypt. The accounts say Zeus at last touched her with a gentle hand on the banks of the Nile and gave the girl her body back. And she stood up, human on the far side of the world from home. She lived. Underline that, because this story pays out so little mercy that we should count every coin of it. She lived. She bore a son. She became, the Greeks believed, a great queen in Egypt, honored there for ages. Io got an ending. Now come back to the question I told you to hold. Why the girl? Io never chose any of it. Not the dreams. Not the meadow. Not the cloud. Hera knew that. She was ancient and she was brilliant, and she had watched the whole thing happen from above. She knew exactly where the guilt lived. It lived next to her at breakfast. It sat on the other throne, and it was untouchable, because he was the king, and the thunder was his, and the one night anyone ever tried to bind him. And that night is coming in this story. It ended with a lesson the whole sky never forgot. So her anger did what anger does when the way up is sealed. It flowed downhill, down from the mountain, away from the throne. on to the one heart in the whole affair that had never once had a choice. The Greeks watched their Queen of Heaven do this, story after story, and they did not call it justice. They had stood too close to power themselves to call it strange. Either, in their houses too. When the master of the house did wrong, it was somehow always the servant girl who was sent away. That is the coldest thing in her file, and I have now shown it to you, honestly. In full. The first entry. It will not be the last. Her rage never once in 4,000 years touched the person who earned it. And that fact sits at the center of her story like the dark at the center of a flame. But before you judge her from a comfortable century away, remember what you watched tonight. She guarded the vow for every wife in Greece, and when her own was broken, in her own city, under a homemade midnight, the entire justice available to the Queen of the Universe amounted to one clever trap, one doomed watchman, and a bird's tail, full of eyes. The white cow found peace in Egypt. The Queen went back up the long stairs, and down in Thebes, a city we know well from other stories. A young princess was about to learn that when the king of the gods comes calling in the dark, the most dangerous thing his wife can hand you is not a monster, and not a gadfly. It is a question. South of Olympus, in the city of Thebes, there was a princess who had never seen the face of the man she loved. Her name was Semele, and she was young, and she was the daughter of the king. And for months now, a visitor had been coming to her rooms after dark. He came as a warmth in the blackness, a voice, a presence that filled the room, the way a storm fills a valley. He told her he was Zeus, the king of the gods, the lord of the sky. Hera, he told her in the dark, always in the dark, and the lamps were never lit. And by morning he was gone. She believed him. And here is the thing about Semele that you need to hold with some tenderness. She was right to believe him. It really was Zeus. Everything he told her in the dark was true. She was carrying his child, a child of the highest god, and she knew it. And she walked through her days in Thebes with the biggest secret in the world folded under her heart. But a secret like that presses on a person, and a love you can never see leaves a door open in the mind. A small draught of doubt. And doubt is patient. It does not need to argue. It only needs to wait for company. On Olympus, the queen already knew. She always knew. That was her curse inside the curse. The intelligence of her, the attention. Some wives learn to look away, and their marriages survive on the mercy of blindness. Hera saw everything, and this time, when she looked down at Thebes, she decided on something new. No clouds torn open, no confrontation in a meadow. She had learned from the last one. Force the king's hand, and the king protects his secret, and the girl pays, and the marriage grinds on, and nothing under the sun actually changes. This time, she would not go anywhere near her husband. This time, she would only ask a question. An old woman appeared in Thebes, at the door of the princess's rooms. A nurse, grey and bent and kind. The sort of woman who has raised 3 generations of a household and has earned the right to sit close and speak freely. The accounts give her the face of Beroe, Semele's own childhood nurse from the coast. Semele welcomed her in. Of course she did. This face from her earliest years, these familiar old hands. They sat together. They talked the way you talk with someone who knew you before you could walk. Watch this scene carefully, because there is a mirror hidden in it. And the mirror is the whole point. A god, wearing a false shape, sitting close to a trusting girl, using her own tenderness as the way in. You have seen this before. It was a cuckoo, in the rain, on a mountainside. The queen learned the method from the inside. What was done to her, she is now doing. The old poets never point this out. They just set the two scenes down in the same mythology and let them look at each other across the years. And tonight, Sudui, the talk turned, as the old woman gently turned it, to the visitor in the dark, and Semele, who had carried her secret alone for so long, let it out into the lamplight. He is a god, she whispered. He is the highest god. He comes to me, and the whole room hums with him. And I am carrying his son. And the old nurse was quiet for a moment, and then she asked her question. It was such a small question. It cost nothing to ask. It has ruined lives in every century since. In every language. In kitchens and bedrooms and parked cars. And it did its first great work here. But dear one, she said, how do you know? Men say things in the dark. The old woman went on, patting her hand. Any man can claim to be a god after the lamps are out. A god who loved you truly would not hide his face. When the Lord of the Sky goes to his own wife, they say he comes in his true form, in the glory, in the light. That is how a queen is loved. Has he ever shown you that? Or does he only ever come to you as a voice in the dark, like something with a reason to hide? Then she gathered her shawl and kissed the girl's forehead and left. That was the entire attack. No monster, no gadfly, no 100 eyes. One seed, planted in soft ground by a familiar hand. Hera walked out of Thebes as an old woman and did not look back, because she did not need to. She knew exactly what she had set in motion, because the thing she had set in motion was the oldest force in her own life. The need to know for certain. The seed grew all night and all the next day. By the time the presence filled the room again, Semele had stopped being able to think about anything else, and she was clever about it. Cleverer than her years. Or maybe desire made her clever the way it makes all of us clever at exactly the wrong moment. She did not ask him to show himself. Not first. First, she asked him for a promise. Grant me one wish, she said, into the dark. Whatever I ask, swear it. And Zeus, warm and easy and half asleep, in love as much as he could be, laughed and swore. And because a casual promise is not enough between a god and a girl, he swore it the big way, the way that cannot be taken back. He swore it on the river Styx, the black river of the underworld, the one oath that binds even the king of the gods, the oath with no exit built into it anywhere. You have felt this shape before. If you have traveled with us, an arrow leaves the string, and everything after that is just the world waiting for the strike. A vow on the Styx was an arrow of words. Once it was loosed, no power in the universe could call it back. Not regret, not love, not the swearer himself. The room was very quiet, and then Semele asked, "Show me," she said. "Show me the way you show her. Come to me the way you come to your wife. Your true form, all of it. I want to see you." And the dark went cold. The accounts say he begged. "Take it back," he said. "Ask for anything else. Kingdoms, oceans, the stars in handfuls. Anything, anything else. And I want you to hear his begging honestly, because it is one of the few moments in this whole story where Zeus is simply telling the truth with his whole chest. He knew what she was asking for. She did not. She thought she was asking for proof of love. She was asking for the sun to come sit on her bed. She would not take it back. Of course she would not. The question had been planted too well. It had roots all through her now, and behind every plea he made, she heard only the old nurse's voice. If he loved you, truly. So she held her wish, and he ran out of ways to refuse. because the Styx does not care about mercy, and the promise came due. I am going to tell you what happened next with light, and only light, because that is how it happened. He gave her what she asked for. He let the disguise go, and the true form of the sky filled a bedroom in Thebes. It began, I think, as beauty, a brightness rising in the room like the first second of sunrise. And for that first second, it must have felt like winning, like proof, like the answer to every doubt she had ever carried. There he was, at last, entirely, and the light kept rising, past sunrise, past noon, past anything with a name, the walls going white, the air itself starting to sing, and she saw him. The accounts say she truly saw him. For one full heartbeat. For one heartbeat she knew more about the universe than any mortal woman who had ever lived. It was one heartbeat too many. No mortal body is built for that seeing. The brightness took the room, and the palace shook, and when the light finally folded itself away, there was silence in Thebes, and smoke, and the princess was gone, not wounded, gone, the way a drop of water is gone from a hot stone. The fire took everything except the one thing it had no claim on, the child. Zeus reached into the burning and lifted his unborn son out of it, tiny, months early, impossibly alive. And then the king of the gods did something no story had ever shown before. He opened his own flesh, his thigh, and he sewed the child inside himself, and he carried it there, under his own skin, until it was ready to be born. Think of what that means, and who it answers. The man who was never there, the father of hundreds who raised none of them, for this one child, the child of the girl his marriage killed. He became the thing he had never once been. He became the one who carries. The baby was born months later, out of the god himself, and they named him Dionysus, the twice-born. He would grow into the god of the vine, of wine and wildness and the theatre, of everything in life that loosens what is bound. And after his long wanderings on the earth, he did what almost no child of a mortal mother ever did. He came home to Olympus, as a god, as one of the 12, so now stand in the great hall of the palace, years later, at some feast of the gods, and find the queen at her high table. Look where she is looking, there, laughing among the immortals, crowned in ivy, pouring wine, sits the son of Semele, the living result of that bedroom in Thebes, deathless now, permanent now, seated at the family table until the end of time. She had won that night. She had won completely, without lifting a hand, with one question asked in a borrowed voice. And this was the prize. Every feast. Forever. Across the table, the child of the girl in the fire, raising a cup in the seat her victory had built for him. That is how her victories tended to pay out. And you should start keeping the ledger now, because the pattern will not change. The king lost nothing. The girl lost everything. And the queen won her way. One more time, into a slightly more crowded room and a slightly colder marriage. The poets say Dionysus, of all the family, eventually treated her with courtesy, and she him. Eternity is long, and even the sharpest debts go quiet in the end. But no one ever claimed she loved the sound of his laughter. The lamps are burning low. One more woman is coming tonight. One more name in the ledger. And this one you already know. This one you have known since another story entirely. Since a night on the open sea. Since a floating island and a palm tree and a girl born into the wind. We have arrived at Leto. And this time, you and I will not be standing on the beach. This time we watch from the balcony of heaven, standing beside the queen, while she closes the doors of the world. If you have traveled with us before, you have already lived through this chapter once. You lived through it at sea level. You stood beside a woman named Leto on the night water of the Aegean, 9 months, heavy with the children of Zeus, sailing from coast to coast in the dark. You watched the harbors close as she approached. You watched lamplit doorways go dark, town after town, island after island, the whole map of the world turning its back one shoreline at a time. You heard the same answer everywhere, spoken or silent. Not here. You cannot rest here. Keep moving. That night, from the water, the rejection felt like weather, like something vast and faceless. A cold front of fear moving across the world ahead of one exhausted woman. It was not weather. It was policy. Tonight, you get the other half of the story. The half the Artemis telling had no room for. Tonight you stand where the policy came from. Come up the long stairs, through the tall doors, out onto the high balcony of Olympus, into the cold, clean air above everything. The queen is at the railing. She is looking down at the night sea, at one small boat crawling from island to island. She has been standing there for months. Understand first what she knew, because she knew everything. She knew her husband had gone to Leto, a Titan's daughter, gentle by every account, dark, veiled, soft-spoken, harmless. She knew Leto was carrying twins, and she knew one thing more, the thing that separated this affair from every other in the ledger. A prophecy hung over these particular children. The son Leto carried would be a glory among the gods, a lord of light, an archer whose temples would crowd the earth. This was not one more mortal girl and one more forgettable half-god child. This was the arrival of power. New thrones were coming, and they were coming out of another woman's body. Now, put the queen's whole biography behind her eyes as she stands at that railing, because this is the chapter where her past and her cruelty finally connect. And I want you to watch it happen. She was swallowed once. She spent her childhood inside the dark of a father who ate his children because a prophecy told him one of them would replace him. She knows, in her actual body, in whatever gods have instead of bones, what the fear of replacement does to a king, because she is the surviving evidence of it. And now she stands at the top of the remade world, the queen at last, the dark years behind her, and a prophecy walks the earth in the shape of a pregnant woman, and every step that woman takes is a step toward a future with more thrones in it. Thrones she did not approve, born from a bed that was not hers. Her father's fear ate his children. Her fear closed the world. She did not send a monster. Listen to how she did it. Because the method is the portrait. She issued a decree. A word went out from the throne of heaven to every land and every island, to every place with roots in the floor of the sea. No ground shall receive Leto. No shore shall let her rest. No town, no island, no riverbank shall give that woman one hand's breadth of earth to lie down on, and any place that disobeys will answer to the queen. That is the whole weapon. No claws in it. No fire. Pure administration. She turned the entire planet into a door, and she closed it. And then she stood at the railing and watched it stay closed, month after month, while the boat below grew slower and lower in the water, and the world obeyed her. That is the detail that should catch in your throat. Not one town cracked. Not one island chanced it. Kings who feared nothing feared this. The queen's attention. The queen's memory. You have seen what happens to those who cross her. And so had they. The Greeks like to say fear of Zeus moved the world. Watch this chapter closely. The thunderbolt stayed on its hook the entire time. All of this, the whole closed planet, ran on fear of her. There is one more cruelty in the design, and it is the one the old poets flinched at. Childbirth in that world had a goddess of its own, the one who attended every labor, whose presence let a birth begin at all. Her name was Eileithyia. She was Hera's daughter. So when the time finally came, when Leto found the one place the decree could not reach, and you remember the place, the floating island, Delos, unrooted, technically nowhere, exempt on a filing error. Even then the queen was not finished. The labor began and would not progress, day after impossible day, because the goddess of childbirth simply did not arrive. Her mother had kept her home, held her back, hour by hour, while a woman screamed on a beach at the edge of the world, the queen of marriage and family, the guardian of every birthing room in Greece, used her own child as a lock on another woman's body. 9 days. The oldest hymn says, 9 days of labor on the open sand. You know how it ends. The other goddesses, aching for Leto, finally smuggled a message to Eileithyia behind the queen's back, and bribed her south with a necklace of gold and amber, 9 cubits long. And the moment her foot touched the island, the births came. The girl first, quiet, eyes open, then the boy, and the world went gold. You were there. The swans, the anchoring of the island, the palm tree. The first thing the firstborn ever saw was her mother's pain, and the sight organized the next 4,000 years of her existence. Here is what I could not tell you then, because we did not know the queen yet. The firstborn on that beach and the woman on that balcony are the same story, told in reverse. One goddess began her life watching what the world does to an unprotected woman, and she answered it by refusing the world. All of it. Marriage, cities, company, the whole apparatus. She built her life in the wild, out of reach, and you have heard what that cost. The other goddess began her life inside the swallowing dark of power, and she answered it by seizing the apparatus itself, the throne, the crown, the vow, the whole architecture, and holding on with both hands forever. And you are hearing what that cost. And on one night, in the middle of time, those two answers faced each other across open water. The woman who became the system, standing at the railing of heaven, and below her, being born on the sand in defiance of every closed door. The girl who would refuse systems for the rest of eternity. Neither of them ever forgot that night. The Greeks knew it. In the songs, Artemis and Hera circle each other down all the centuries with a coldness that needs no explaining. And now you have stood on both sides of it. You have earned the coldness. You know what it is made of. But the story keeps one last turn for this chapter, and it is the one I have been walking you toward since the balcony door opened. Hera lost. Say it plainly, because in the whole ledger so far, it has not happened once. Io lost, Semele lost, and the queen, whatever it cost her, won. Not this time. The children were born. The prophecy came true on schedule. In full, in gold. The boy became Apollo, and his temples crowded the earth exactly as promised. And the girl, the quiet firstborn, the one nobody had even bothered to prophesy about, grew into the untouchable lady of the wild. And then the world did something with a shape so perfect that no poet would have dared invent it. Think about what Hera did on that balcony. Of all the weapons she has used in these 3 chapters, the one she chose against Leto was the birthing room. She weaponized labor itself. She took the most dangerous night in any woman's life, the night that killed more women in that world than war killed men. And she made it longer, on purpose, for 9 days, in the open, as an instrument of policy, And the child born at the end of those 9 days became the goddess who stands guard at every labor in the world, the keeper of the birthing room door, the one that women in their worst hour would call into the lamplight for the next 1,000 years. On the border, the queen had turned into a weapon. The universe never punished Hera for Delos. No thunderbolt, no trial, no reckoning. It did something quieter and far more permanent. It staffed the door against her. The old poets never say this was an answer. They never had to. They just set the two facts side by side in the record. The 9 days, and the firstborn's calling, and let them look at each other forever. The way they set the cuckoo beside the old nurse. The way this whole mythology talks to itself in the dark when it thinks nobody is listening. The boat is gone from the night sea. The island has anchored, far below, and something new is glowing on it. The queen turns from the railing at last and walks back through the tall doors. And her face, the accounts agree, showed exactly nothing. Inside her, something had shifted just the same. 3 women, 3 defeats dressed as victories. And now 1 plain defeat with nothing to dress it. And the king untouched through all of it, unreachable, serene, already looking elsewhere. Whatever she was going to do next was going to have to be different. She did not know yet that the next name in the ledger would be different all on its own. Not a nymph this time. Not a princess in a dark bedroom. A married woman this time. A general's wife in Thebes. Faithful, blameless, asleep beside the memory of her husband. And out of that one night would come the enemy of Hera's life. A child with her own name buried inside his. Something strange happened to the sun over Thebes. The people of the city could not have told you what. Exactly. All they knew was that a certain night felt long, too long. The lamps burned down and were refilled and burned down again. And the roosters slept on. And the stars held their places like actors who had forgotten their cue. Farmers woke, judged the darkness, and slept again. Twice, 3 times, somewhere out at the edge of the world. The accounts say the sun simply waited, because the king of the gods had asked the dawn to stay in bed, and the dawn does not argue with the king. Zeus was in Thebes, and he had stretched one night into 3. The woman he had come for was named Alcmene, and she deserves better than the footnote history gave her. So give her a good look now. A general's wife, granddaughter of the hero Perseus, and by every account we have, one of the most honorable women in all the old stories. Her husband Amphitryon was away at war, fighting to avenge her brothers, and she had made him a promise with her whole spine behind it. Faithful until you return. Inner mythology, crawling with weak moments. Alcmene has none. She was never once going to open that door to a stranger. So the stranger did not come as a stranger. You know the method by now. You have watched it work on a mountainside in the rain. And you have watched the queen herself borrow it in a bedroom in Thebes. The king came to Alcmene's door wearing her own husband's face. His walk, his voice, his laugh, the little scar stories and camp gossip only Amphitryon could know. All of it perfect. And the faithful wife welcomed home the man she had promised herself to, because keeping her vow is exactly what she believed she was doing. The cruelty of that is worth one quiet moment of your attention. Her fidelity was the door he walked through. In this family, your best quality is always the way in. 3 nights inside one, and then he was gone. And the real Amphitryon came home the next day to a welcome slightly warmer and slightly more confused than he could account for. And time moved on, and Alcmene was carrying twins. 1 child of her husband, 1 child of the sky. 9 months later, On Olympus, the king could not keep his mouth shut. This is the scene the whole chapter turns on. So come, stand in the great hall for it. Zeus, expansive, glowing, a certain, announcing to the assembled gods that this very day a child would be born of the line of Perseus, and that this child would rule all the peoples around him. A king's boast, thrown out into the hall the way rich men throw coins. Careless, because what could it cost him? The queen was listening. The queen was always listening. And the queen had spent 3 chapters of this story learning exactly how her husband's power worked. And here is what she had learned. His strength could not be fought. His desires could not be fenced. But his words, once spoken, had weight even he could not lift. And a man who cannot stop making promises has handed his enemy an armory. She stepped forward, in front of all the gods, and she asked him sweetly to swear it. Make it an oath. Husband, say it, so it binds. The child of the line of Perseus born this day shall rule. And Zeus, riding his own certainty, swore, the great oath, the unbreakable kind. You already know the shape of what happens next, because you watched a girl in Thebes ask for one wish too many. An oath in this universe is an arrow loosed. The moment it left his lips, the matter passed out of his hands and into hers, because the oath said the line of Perseus. It did not say which branch. And Hera, who knew every family tree in Greece, down to its smallest root, knew that in the city of Tyrans, another descendant of Perseus had a wife 7 months along. What happened next happened at 2 bedsides at once, and it happened through her daughter. You remember Eileithyia, the goddess of childbirth, the one held back from Delos while a woman labored 9 days on the sand. The queen reached for the same lever again, to Thebes, where Alcmene's time had come. Eileithyia went at her mother's word and sat down at the threshold, with her knees pressed together and her fingers laced into a lock. And the old belief was that this posture, held by this goddess, could hold a birth shut, and, in Tyrans, the other cradle of the line of Perseus, the doors of birth swung open early, far too early, and a boy came into the world at 7 months, small and weak and blinking. They named him Eurystheus. Remember the name. He will spend this whole story being the wrong man in the right place. By sundown, the trap had paid in full. Zeus's own oath, measured to the letter, now belonged to a premature child in Tyrans. The kingdoms, the rule, the promised glory, all of it settled by law on Eurystheus. While in Thebes the intended prince had not yet managed to be born at all, the king of the gods stood in his own hall and understood, too late, what his wife had done to him with his own sentence. The accounts say his rage was terrible. The accounts also say it changed nothing. That is what an oath was for. Mark this day in the ledger with a different color, because it is the first of its kind. Io was a victory over a girl. Semele was a victory over a girl. Delos was a defeat. This, at last, was a victory over him. She never touched Alcmene. She reached past the woman entirely and struck the king where he actually lived. In his pride, in his word, in his plans for his favorite unborn son. She beat him with grammar. It was the cleanest win she would ever get. And she got it in his own courtroom, in front of the whole family, using nothing but his own voice. In Thebes, when Eileithyia finally left the threshold. The accounts differ, charmingly, on why. The version I love has a quick-witted servant girl named Galanthis bursting out of the birthing room shouting that the baby had already come, and the startled goddess leaping up in surprise, and the lock breaking, and the birth rushing through the open door before anyone could close it again. Heaven undone for a moment by one fast girl with a good lie. The old world loved that story. And so do I. The twins were born, Iphicles, the son of Amphitryon, ordinary and dear, and his brother, the son of the sky, arriving one night late for a kingdom that had already been given away. Now the name, I have been holding it all chapter, the way the old poets held it, because it deserves its own clean moment. The family knew from the start that the Queen's eye was on this house. Some accounts say a prophet advised them. Others say the parents simply hoped to soften the anger they could feel gathering in the weather over Thebes. Whatever the reason, when they named the boy, they reached for the most protective name they could build, a name designed as an offering, a name meant to flatter the very goddess who wanted him unborn. They took her name, Hera, and they joined it to Kleos, the Greek word for glory, the fame that songs carry forward. Herakles, Hercule, the Romans would say it later, say it slowly, the way it deserves, the glory of Hera, the greatest hero this civilization would ever produce, the strongest man who ever walked in its stories, the one name from all of Greek myth that every person listening tonight already knew as a child, carries her name inside it, stitched there at birth, by parents hoping to buy mercy that never came. It gets stranger the longer you hold it. Everything the world would come to call glorious about this boy would be forged in the fire of her hatred. Every monster she sends becomes a story with his name on it. Every trial she designs becomes a rung on his ladder. Hold that in your hand for the next 3 chapters and feel how heavy it is. The name was meant as flattery. It came true as prophecy. His glory would be of Hera, from Hera, made by Hera, the way a blade is made by the hammer that strikes it. She did not see it that way. Not yet. Not for a long time. From where she stood, the day's arithmetic was simple. The oath was spent. The kingdom was safely wasted on Eurystheus. And the child in Thebes was now just a child, mortal on his mother's side, vulnerably, reachable, and she had never in her long life left that kind of loose end untied. Down in Thebes, in a lamplit room that smelled of clean linen, Alcmene nursed 2 newborn sons and watched the door. She was no fool. She knew whose city this was, and she knew what the long night 9 months ago had cost her. And she knew that somewhere above the roof, Pacientus winter, a queen was thinking about her boys. She was right. It is deep night in Thebes, some months later, and I want to take you into the nursery, because the nursery is where the legend actually begins. The house of Amphitryon is asleep. You can walk through it in your mind, room by dark room, past the banked embers of the kitchen fire, past a sleeping dog that stirs and settles, down the corridor where a single small lamp burns in a niche in the wall, the kind of lamp mothers leave lit. At the end of the corridor is the room where the twins sleep. The family has a story they will tell forever about the shield, Amphitryon's great bronze war shield, broad as a table, hangs in that room, and the babies sleep in its hollow, side by side, wrapped in lamb's wool, 2 small breathing shapes in a cradle built for battle, a general's sons, bedded down in the family's strength. The lamp flame stands perfectly still. The house breathes, and down at the floor, where the moonlight comes in thin under the door, 2 shadows arrive that do not belong to anything in the house. They come in without one sound. That silence was remarked on even in the ancient tellings. The wrongness of it, the way something that size should whisper against the stone and does not. 2 serpents, huge ones, scaled in darkness, and the accounts do not bother pretending they are ordinary snakes that wandered in from the hills, because everyone in Greece knew exactly whose they were and exactly why they had come. And so do you. The queen had sent her answer to the nursery. They pour across the floor like 2 lines of spilled night, and they rise up the sides of the great shield, and they look down into it. The babies are awake. Iphicles wakes first, or wakes worst, and his part in this story is the honest human part. So give him his due. He sees what is looking down at him, and he does what you would do. What I would do. What every sane creature does. He screams. He screams the whole house awake, kicking free of his blankets. And that scream is the sanest sound in this entire chapter, and nobody should ever be ashamed of it. His scream is the reason the adults come running. In a way, Iphicles saves everyone but his brother. His brother does not scream. His brother, the accounts say, sits up, a baby, months old, in the dark, with 2 serpents cresting the rim of the shield like waves about to break, and the child sits up and looks at them with something that no one in that world had a word for yet. And then he reaches out, both hands at once, and he takes them. One small fist closes around each throat. By the time Amphitryon bursts in with his sword drawn and half of Thebes' torches flaring in the corridor behind him, it is over. The general stands frozen in his own doorway, blade, useless, in his hand, staring at the inside of the shield, where one twin is howling in the corner, healthy and loud and terrified, and the other twin is laughing, sitting up in the lamb's wool, delighted, holding up his night's work to show his father the way babies hold up a toy they are proud of. One enormous serpent hanging limp from each little fist. The old poet Pindar, who told this scene as well as anyone ever has, says the household seer was summoned before dawn and looked at the child and began to speak of the future in a voice that shook, of monsters this boy would meet on land and sea, of labors, of a fame that would fill the world, and of a strange peace at the very end of the long road, a peace no one in the room could have believed if they had understood it. But stand back from the prophecy and look at the mechanics of the night itself, because there is a lesson in it that the queen on the mountain was slow to learn, and her slowness is the engine of everything ahead. Before the serpents, this baby was a rumor, a whispered thing, one more of the king's scattered children, a private grief in one Theban household. The morning after the serpents, he was a fact. All Thebes had seen the torches. All Thebes heard the seer's words by noon, and the roads carried it from there. Hera had reached down to erase a child in the dark, quietly, before his story could begin, and instead she had given his story its first page, its best page, the page every teller for 4,000 years would open with, "Baby strangles snakes in cradle." She wrote that. Her attack is the oldest proof anyone had that this child was more than a child. Keep that shape in view, because it never once changes. Everything she throws at him becomes him. Every weapon she sends down gets added to his legend, like iron added to a blade. She is trying to unmake a boy, and she is manufacturing a hero. And the terrible engine of it is just getting warm. And it is here, between the cradle and the wars to come, that the tradition sets the strangest scene in their whole long feud. And I have saved it for the end of this chapter, because you can check my work tonight, from your window, before you sleep. The story exists in a few versions, and I will tell it the way it was told most. The child needed what only heaven could give, a mortal mother's son, marked for impossible things, would need a taste of immortal strength to survive what was coming, and there was exactly one source of it, and she would rather have ended the world than offer it. So heaven arranged what heaven always arranges in these stories. A trick. In one telling it is Hermes, in another Athena, guiding the queen on a walk, steering her gently toward a certain field outside Thebes where a baby has been left, seemingly abandoned, crying in the grass. And Hera, and I need you to sit with this detail. Hera stops. The scourge of her husband's children stops for a crying child she does not recognize. Whatever else 4,000 years have said about her. In the oldest version of this story, when the Queen of Heaven finds an abandoned baby in a field, her first motion is to pick it up. She gathers the child in. She lets it nurse. For a moment, the whole feud is suspended in the middle of that field, and the enemy of her life drinks divine strength at her own breast, milk that no mortal child was ever meant to taste, the deep fuel of gods, and she is giving it freely to a stranger, out of simple mercy, which was always in her. Remember the cuckoo. It was always the door, and then the child, being who he is, nurses too strong, a grip past anything human, a pull with the future in it, and the queen startles, and looks down, and knows. She tears him away from her, and the milk, the accounts say, sprays across the darkness of heaven, and it stays there. Go outside tonight, if your sky is dark enough and clear enough, away from the city glow, and look up, and you will see a pale band of light arching across the whole sky from horizon to horizon, made of more stars than anyone can count, the combined shine of 100 billion suns, so far away they blur into mist. The Greeks looked at that band and told this story. The milk of Hera, they said, flung across the night in the moment she pushed away the child she could not love. They called it the Galaxia's Kyklos, the circle of milk. The Romans translated it and handed it down to us, and we have never once renamed it. The Milky Way. It is on every star chart on Earth. It is the name of the galaxy you are lying in right now, the address of every human being who has ever slept and dreamed. The whole spiraling city of stars we live in is named for the instant Hera's mercy and Hera's hatred touched. One heartbeat apart, in a field outside Thebes, and the drink had already done its work. That is the last turn of the night. Those few swallows of heaven were in the boy for good, woven into him, a bedrock of the divine under the mortal frame. She could not take it back. Milk does not travel that direction. In the very act of pushing him away, she completed the gift, and the child in the grass now carried, courtesy of the queen herself, the one thing her serpents had needed him not to have, the strength to survive her. So add up her account at the end of this chapter. Because the numbers have gone strange, she sent 2 serpents, and they became his first legend. She was tricked into one act of kindness, and it became his armor. Her name is his name. Her milk is his strength. Her hatred is about to become his resume. 12 lines long, written across the whole map of the known world. The queen has not lost a war yet, but she is in one now, and it is the longest of her life. And every shot she fires lands on her own position, and she cannot see it, and she will not see it for years. The boy grew. That is the whole story of the next stretch of time. Told in 3 words, the boy grew, and Thebes watched him grow the way you watch weather build over the mountains. And his teachers came, and his strength came, and a wife came, and children came, small ones, his own. He built the one thing his father never built, a household, a hearth with a family around it. And on the mountain, the queen watched him build it, and understood at last where this man could be broken. Not in his body. She had tested the body, and the body had laughed at her from inside a bronze shield. She had grown up inside a broken family, It was the one map she knew by heart. I am going to tell you the hardest chapter of this story now, and I am going to tell it the way the old poets told the hardest things, from a distance, gently, without walking you through the middle of it. You will be safe the whole way. But you should know before we begin that this is the chapter the whole feud was building toward, and there is no way around it. Only through. It begins on a beautiful morning. They always seem to. A courtyard in Thebes. Early, the light still soft and slanted. A man is kneeling in the middle of it, perfectly still. He is the strongest man in the world. Around him the courtyard is silent, in a way courtyards are never silent. No servants moving, no dogs, no morning sounds from the kitchen, only birds somewhere outside the walls, singing into the quiet the way birds do, because birds do not know anything. The man is waking up, not from sleep, from something else, and as he wakes, he is beginning to look around him, and the story stands still here, at the edge of what he sees, and does not go closer. Let me take you back instead, and tell you how the morning came to be. The boy from the shield had become a man, and the man had built a life. This has to be understood first, because it is the target. He had married a princess of Thebes, Megara, given to him in honor after he saved the city. They had children, 3 sons in most tellings, small boys at the age where they follow a father around a courtyard like ducklings. The strongest man alive, whose own father was a rumor in the sky, had made the thing his father never once made in all his conquests. A home, one hearth, one family, all of them his, all of them under one roof. He came back to. The queen had been watching for years by then, and here is where this story becomes the coldest thing in her file. Colder than Io, colder than the closed doors of Delos. And to see it, honestly, you have to stand where she stood and notice what she noticed. Every weapon she had sent against his body had failed. Serpents in the cradle, dangers on the road. The accounts scatter them through his youth, like storms through a sailing season. And all of them together had only made him famous. His body had her own milk in it. The body could not be reached. But she had grown up inside a family that ate itself. She was swallowed by her father. She was deceived into her marriage. She had spent her whole immortal life watching love be used as a door. And so she knew something about the strong that the strong never know about themselves. She knew that nobody is defended everywhere. The walls face outward, and what a man loves stands inside the walls with him. At the hearth, at arm's reach, in the one place he will never think to guard, because guarding it from himself is a thought his mind cannot form. She did not send a monster to Thebes. Monsters had made him. She sent madness. The Greeks gave it a name and a shape. Lusa, the spirit of the fury that takes the mind whole. The same force they saw in the eyes of rabid things. Even Lusa, in the great old play about this night, hesitates. That detail has survived 25 centuries, and it still stops the breath. The madness itself looks at the target and asks the queen to reconsider. This man is a benefactor of gods and men. She says, this is not right. The queen did not reconsider. And so, on an evening when the strongest man in the world stood at his own altar, at his own hearth, with his family around him, the madness came down on him like weather, and his mind was taken from him. Whole, what his eyes saw from that moment was not his courtyard and not his family. The play says he believed himself far away, in the house of his enemy, surrounded by the enemy's kin. Everything he loved wore, to his stolen eyes, the face of everything he hated. He was the strongest man in the world, and for one night, his strength belonged to her. That is all. That is as close as we go. The old tellers drew the curtain here. And they were right. And we will honor it. What was done in that courtyard was done by his hands, and it was none of it his doing. And both of those things are true at once. And that is the exact shape of the cruelty. She had found the one wound that only exists for good men. The guilty cannot be broken this way. Only love opens this door. Now you know what morning we walked in on. He wakes in the courtyard, kneeling, and the madness lifts the way fog lifts, in slow rags, and understanding arrives in pieces. That is his own altar. That is his own doorway. This is his own house. And the story stands with him at the edge of the last piece, the piece in the middle of the courtyard, and lets it stay unspoken, because he is beginning to understand it, and no one should have to understand it twice. His father Amphitryon is there, the old general, the man who raised him. Someone has to say the words, and it falls to the old man, because that is what fathers are for at the end of everything. The play gives them their scene. Where am I? The son asks, who did this? And the old man, weeping, answers, the only way there is to answer. You did, and you were not you. The son's first motion, when the whole truth lands, is toward his own death. The accounts are unanimous and unembarrassed about it. He looks for a way to follow his family out of the world, because the arithmetic of grief says the hands that did this should not continue, and he is stopped. In the great telling, by a friend, Theseus of Athens, who owed him a debt from an older story, arrives in the silence, and does the simplest and largest thing one man can do for another on the worst morning of his life. He does not flinch. He does not step back from him, or speak to him carefully, like something broken. He takes his friend's hands, the hands themselves, the ones that did it, and he pulls him to his feet, and he says, in effect, you will not die. You will come to Athens. You will live, and I will help you carry this, because that is what a friend is. And carrying is possible. I have seen it done. Hold on to Theseus for a moment, because he is proof of something this story badly needs right here. The queen's design was flawless, and it did exactly what it was built to do. And even so, it did not get everything. Grief that size is a country, and she had exiled him to it. But she could not empty it of other people. Someone walked in after her and sat down with him in the ruins. Her power ended at the edge of that friendship, and she could do nothing about it. And I want you to remember that, the next time this story feels like the dark is winning. What follows for the broken man is the road to Delphi, to the oracle. Because, in that world, when blood is on your hands, even innocent blood, even blood the gods put there is a procedure, purification, penance, a price, paid in service, until the stain is worked off. And the oracle's answer sent him to the last place in the world the old ledger would have predicted. Go to Tiryns. The god's voice said, submit yourself to its king. Serve him. Perform whatever labors he sets you. Complete them all, and your guilt will be washed away. And something more than cleanness waits at the end of the work. The king of Tiryns, the 7 months child, the small, frightened, unremarkable man who had been holding the strongest man's stolen birthright his entire life, and knew it, and lived in terror of the day the strong man might come to collect. Eurystheus, Hera Eurystheus, the wrong man in the right place, one last time. So the queen's masterpiece completed itself with a symmetry that even she could not have drafted in advance. The man she could not kill would now spend years on his knees before the man she had raised over him with a trick of grammar. His penance would be commanded by her creature. His humiliation would be public. and endless, and legal, sanctioned by Delphi itself, and every task would be designed, with her whispering behind the throne, to be impossible, and lethal, and far from home. 12 labors. That was the sentence when the counting settled. 12 impossible things, one after another, each one meant to be his last. She thought she was writing his punishment, line by line, monster by monster. She thought she was finally writing the end of him. She was writing the syllabus of the most famous hero who ever lived. She was writing the ladder, and the whole world was about to watch him climb it, rung by rung, straight up, toward her. There is an old truth about storms that sailors in every century have known, and it is the key to this entire chapter. So take it with you as we go. A storm cannot sink a ship by hating it. All a storm can do is blow, and the same wind that drowns a weak ship drives a strong one faster than it could ever sail on its own. The storm has no say in which one it gets. It just arrives, and blows with everything it has, and finds out what the ship is made of. For the next stretch of years, Hera was the storm, and she was about to find out what the ship was made of. 12 labors. I am not going to march you through all 12 like a museum guide. That road is long, and other tellings have walked it well. What I want you to see is the pattern underneath, the machinery, because from where the queen sat, this was not a hero's saga. This was a project, her project, and it went wrong in the same direction every single time. Start with the first labor, because the first one shows the whole shape. There was a lion in the hills of Nemea, southwest of Corinth, a lion out of scale with the world, with a hide no weapon could cut. Spears bent on it, arrows fell off it like rain off slate. The old traditions differ on where such a creature came from, but more than one of them says it plainly. The lion was raised up and settled in those hills by Hera. Understand what that means. This was not a monster the hero happened to meet. This was ordnance. She had been stocking the world with weapons against him, some of them for years, the way a careful power stocks armories in peacetime. The man came to Nemea and found that his arrows were useless, and understood the assignment underneath the assignment. So he set down every weapon he had, and he went into the dark of the lion's own cave with his empty hands, the same hands from the shield, the same hands from the courtyard. And when he walked back out into the light, the lion did not. And then he did the thing that turned her weapon into his wardrobe. The hide could not be cut, so he skinned the beast with its own claws, and he made the invulnerable skin into a cloak, the head into a hood, and from that day until his last day, the hero of heroes walked the world wearing the queen's first weapon across his shoulders. Every statue you have ever seen of Hercules, every painting, every cartoon, shows the lion's skin. Her opening move became his uniform. The storm blew, and the ship went faster. Second labor. In the swamps of Lerna lived the Hydra, a serpent with many heads and poison in its blood. And the tradition is even clearer about this one. Hera raised the Hydra herself, deliberately, specifically, as an instrument against him. This was her design refined, because the Hydra was a riddle with teeth. Cut off one head, and 2 grew back. Strength made it worse. Effort fed it. It was, if you look at it, slantwise, a portrait of her own strategy. Because every blow she had ever landed on this man had only multiplied his legend. And now she had built a monster that worked the same way. And she aimed it at him, and she still did not see the lesson in her own weapon. He saw it. That was always the difference between them in these years. He and his nephew Iolaus worked it out together in the swamp, in the stench and the dark. You cannot cut your way out of a problem that feeds on cutting. You have to close each wound the moment you make it. Seal it shut with fire so nothing grows back. So one cut, and the other sealed, head by head, until the riddle ran out of answers. And when it was done, he dipped his arrows in the creature's poison. And for the rest of his life, the storm's second weapon flew ahead of him in his quiver. And here, in the middle of the swamp, the tradition sets down one of the strangest small scenes in all of mythology. And I love it too much to leave out. The queen, watching her hydra lose, could not bear it, and she reached for anything, and what she had at hand was a crab, a giant crab, sacred to her, which scuttled out of the swamp in the middle of the fight and seized the hero by the heel. It did not go well for the crab. He barely broke rhythm. But Hera, watching her smallest soldier be crushed for her sake, did for the crab exactly what she had done for the 100-eyed watchman. She honored her dead. She lifted the crab into the night sky and set it among the constellations, where it hangs to this hour. It is called Cancer. The crab, one of the 12 signs of the zodiac. And if you were born in late June or most of July, it is your sign. And now you know what it is doing up there. It is a war memorial. Some of you listening tonight carry, on your birth certificates, the emblem of a crab that pinched Hercules once and died for the Queen of Heaven. She was that kind of power, and both halves of it were true at once. And you have known this about her since the peacock, ruthless down the chain of command, and fiercely, permanently loyal up it. She never forgot a servant. She never forgave an equal. Every creature that died in her service got a pension paid in stars, and every innocent her husband touched got a war. That is not a contradiction. That is a code. The code of a queen. And you do not have to like it to understand it by now. The labors rolled on. Years of them. A deer with golden antlers that could not be caught. So he ran it down on foot across a whole year. Patient as winter, because the assignment was really about the running. A boar brought back alive on his shoulders, and the accounts pause to tell us that when Eurystheus saw it come through his gate, kicking, the king of Tyrants hid inside a huge bronze storage jar sunk in the floor, and issued his next commands from inside it. His voice ringing in the metal. The Greeks loved that image and told it with the jar for centuries. The great hero of the age, taking his orders from a man in a pot. She had built that humiliation on purpose. Remember, even her comedy had architecture. He cleaned in one day stables that a generation had given up on. By picking up 2 rivers and putting them through the building, he cleared a lake of monstrous birds. He crossed the sea and wrestled a bull. Each impossible thing fell, one after another, and each one fell in some way no one had imagined. And here is what that meant in the currency that actually mattered. Stories. Every labor was a story, and the stories traveled. They crossed the sea faster than ships. By the middle years of the labors, there was not a fishing village in the Greek world where children did not know his name. And his name, every single time it was spoken, in every port, in every language, at every fire, said hers. Heracles, the glory of Hera, 10,000 times a day across the whole map of the world. Her own name, riding his. The 11th labor is the one I have been waiting for since the wedding, and I think you have been waiting for it too, whether you know it or not. Eurystheus, deep in his jar of ideas, and the queen, deep in her patience, set the hero a task that was less an errand than a blasphemy. Bring back the golden apples of the Hesperides. Go to the garden at the western edge of the world, the garden of the gods, and take fruit from the tree that grows there. You know that tree, You were at the party, where it sprouted. The wedding gift. The tree the deep old earth grew for Hera on her wedding day. The one gift that outshone all others. Gold, among green leaves, in the long light of the west. Planted in her own garden and guarded by a serpent that never sleeps. Of every treasure in the universe Eurystheus could have demanded, the task named that one. Steal from the queen's own wedding. Walk into the garden of her marriage, the marriage this whole war had grown out of, and carry off the fruit of its happiest day. I do not know if the little king in the jar understood what he was asking. I am certain she did, and the man went west anyway, to the edge of everything, and the stories of how he managed it are a tangle of wonders. A shape-shifting sea god wrestled for directions, a titan holding up the sky. The weight of the heavens borrowed onto the hero's own shoulders for an afternoon, while the titan fetched the fruit. However it went. It went. He came back east with the queen's wedding gold in his hands. The apples were returned. In the end, Athena carried them west again, because such things belong to the gods, and no mortal city could keep them. But something had been taken that could not be carried back, and the whole world had watched it happen. There was nothing of hers he could not reach now. Her monsters wore out. Her mazes solved themselves under his feet. Even the garden of her wedding day had opened to him. The storm had thrown everything, and the ship was still coming. Hull whole, sails full, riding her own wind. Now let the years spin forward, because this chapter has one more scene, and it is the strangest scene in their whole century of war. And I will tell you now that no poet ever fully explained it, and I will not pretend to either. The hero's mortal life ended, at the last, in fire and agony on a mountaintop, by a poison that traces back, if you follow the threads, to the Hydra's blood, to her second weapon, come home at the end of all things. His mortal half burned away on that pyre, and his immortal half, the half that was his father's, the half that had once drunk from the queen herself in a field outside Thebes, rose. He came up to Olympus, deathless now, permanent now, and the gates opened, and the gods came out to welcome him, and the whole long war arrived at the throne room door with him, because there she sat, at the top of the world, the storm herself, waiting, and the tradition says this. She stood up, and she took him as her son. There was a ritual for it, ancient and strange, an adoption rite of the old world, a symbolic second birth, so that the man born of Alcmene could be born again. This time of Hera, this time into heaven. She performed it herself. And then she did the thing that no one, not the gods, not the poets, not 4,000 years of scholars, has ever fully accounted for. She gave him her daughter, Hera, the goddess of youth, her own child, the child of her actual marriage, was given to Heracles as his bride, and the wedding was held in the halls of Olympus, and the mother of the bride was Hera, and the groom was the enemy of her life. The war was over, not settled, not explained, over. The accounts record no speech from either of them, no reckoning, no apology in either direction. And I think the silence is the truest thing in the whole tradition, because you have been inside a family, and you know, there are wars that end this way, not with justice, with exhaustion, and a wedding, and two people at the same table deciding, without ever saying so, to let the future be larger than the past. Families do it every generation, even the one that rules the sky. He called her mother. Some of the late traditions say, whatever the truth of that, the arithmetic of the ending is beyond argument. So do the sum with me one last time before we sleep on it. She sent the serpents, and they made his first legend. She sent the lion, and it became his armor. She sent the Hydra, and it became his arrows. She sent the madness, and it sent him to the labors. And the labors made him the most famous man who ever lived. And his fame carried her name to every fire on earth. And his death carried him to Olympus. And at the top of Olympus he married into her family and became, by her own ritual, in the eyes of heaven's own law, her son. Every single thing she threw at him became him. And the last thing she threw was herself, the glory of Hera. His parents named him that to flatter a queen and buy a mercy that never came. 4,000 years later, look what the name turned out to mean. Nobody bought anything. The name was simply, in the end, the truth. Arrived at the long way. Through every storm she had, the palace is quiet again. The wedding torches are cold. The halls have emptied. Eternity has moved on. And the queen is back at the railing where we found her once before, looking down at the world of women and vows. Her long war finished. Her strange peace made. She is allowed exactly one breath of it, because far below, in the women's stories, in the small houses, her real war has never stopped. And there are names in her ledger we have not read yet. Names that will cost her more than the hero ever did. One of them is standing in a canyon right now, in the last of the evening light, about to call out a word and hear it come back. Before this chapter begins, go somewhere with me. It will only take a moment. And you have been there before. A canyon at evening, or an empty parking garage. Late, after everyone has gone home, or a stairwell, or a tunnel, or a gymnasium with the lights half off. Any hard-walled, empty place will do. Stand in the middle of it and call out one word, your own name, anything, and wait. Something answers you, your own voice, coming back thinned and distant, one beat behind the world. Children discover it and shout themselves hoarse with the joy of it. Every language on earth has a name for it. And in English, the name is Echo, and almost nobody who says the word knows that it is a girl's name, and that the girl is in this story, and that what happened to her was Hera's doing. Echo was a mountain nymph, and her gift was talk. The old accounts smile when they describe her. She was bright, quick, funny, a fountain of chatter, the kind of company that makes a long afternoon short. And Zeus, who by this point in our story you know thoroughly, found a use for that gift when he went down among the nymphs of the mountains. And he went often. He stationed Echo like a sentry in his wife's path. Her assignment was conversation. Whenever the queen came searching, there was Echo, delightful, endless, impossible to get away from politely. Story after story, question after question, holding Hera in talk on the mountainside while, somewhere over the ridge, whatever needed hiding got hidden. It worked more than once. That detail matters. The Queen of Heaven, whose whole life was reading the space between words, was outmaneuvered repeatedly by a chattering girl, and when she finally understood how, and counted up the afternoons, she had been managed like a visitor being kept in a waiting room. Her anger did what, her anger does. The king had given the orders. The king was untouchable. The girl was standing right there. You love your voice so much, the queen said. In effect, then keep it. Keep only the end of it. And she took from Echo the beginning of speech, the power to start, to say a first word, to call out anything of her own. From that day, the girl could only repeat, only the last words spoken to her, handed back like a coin returned. Ask her a question, and she gives you the tale of your question. Call her name, and she calls it back to you. Forever. The rest of Echo's story belongs to another night. The beautiful boy at the pool. The wasting away, for a love she could never be first to speak. The body fading, until only the voice was left. Thrown among the rocks and the high places. What belongs to this night is simpler and harder. Go back to that canyon. Call out again. What answers you? The old world would say, is a punished girl, 3,000 years into a sentence, still only allowed the ends of things, still repeating us, everywhere on earth, in every empty place with walls. She is the first name in tonight's ledger. There are 2 more, and the second one you already know. You have known her longer than you have known Hera. If you have traveled with us before, you lay in the summer grass of Arcadia one night, while 2 girls counted falling stars. You watched the king of the gods come to one of them, wearing the one disguise that could get past her guard, the face of her own goddess. You watched her sisters pull the tunic from her at the spring, and you heard the handful of words that cast her out, and you stood in the dark when Hera, the queen, arrived to finish what the family had started, and dressed the ruined girl in the shape of a bear. Callisto. We told her story whole in that other telling, from her side, from the forest floor, and I will not retell what you already carry, but I promised you then that one day you would hear the last piece of it, the piece that only makes sense from the balcony of heaven. Tonight you have earned it. You know now what Callisto was to Hera. She was not a rival. She had wanted none of it, chosen none of it. And the queen knew that as surely as she had known it about Io, it changed nothing. And by now you understand the machine well enough to say why, in one breath. The king could not be reached. The girl could. But it is the ending, the very last move. That shows you how deep the wound in the queen had gone. Because years later, when the bear and her grown son met in the woods, and the spear went up, and Zeus, in a spasm of late mercy, swept them both into the sky as stars, the great bear and the little bear, mother and son, safe forever. Most powers in the universe would have called it finished. The girl was beyond hurting now. She was made of light. Hera could not let even the light have her. She went down to the ancient gods of the sea, the old deep powers, Oceanus and Tethys, and stop right there, because you know those names, the faithful ones, the couple who raised her at the edge of the world, the one good marriage she ever lived inside. She went back to the 2 beings who had been mother and father to her, and she asked them for a favor as their foster daughter. And the favor was this: never let that constellation rest. Every other star that wheels through the sky gets to set, to go down into the ocean and bathe and rise again clean. Refuse her. Never let the bear touch the water. And they granted it, and it is still granted. Go out tonight, any clear night, if your sky is northern, and find the Great Bear, the Big Dipper riding low or high around the pole star. Watch it as long as you like, all night, all year. It circles. It never sets. It is the one great constellation in the northern sky that never once goes down to the sea, never rests, never washes, 4,000 years and counting, because a foster daughter asked her parents for a cruelty and they loved her too much to say no. That is the ledger at its coldest. Echo, who talked because she was told to. Callisto, who trusted a face she had every reason to trust. And a third name I will give you only gently. A queen called Lamia, whose children by Zeus died by Hera's hand or Hera's design. The accounts vary. And whose grief drove her out of her own shape into something the Greeks used afterward to frighten children in the dark. Even her story, at its bitter bottom, is the same story. The king wanted, The king walked away whole, and a woman paid the whole bill. Now sit with me at the edge of all three, the way we sat once at the edge of a spring in Arcadia, and let us do the honest thing this story has done from the beginning. No villain speech, no defense, just the count. Count where each blow landed. A nymph silenced, a huntress unmade, a mother hollowed out, a priestess driven weeping across 2 continents, a princess burned by the light she begged to see, a laboring woman locked on a beach for 9 days. And now count how many of those blows landed on the being who broke the vows. That number is 0. It stays 0 for 4,000 years. Her aim was perfect, and her aim was permitted, and those were never the same thing. And somewhere in her ancient mind she knew it, because she was the goddess of law, and no one bends the law with a clearer conscience than the one who keeps it. The Greeks watched all this and did something strange. They did not tear down her temples. They did not carve her out of the calendar. The women of Greece walked up the hill at Argos with their offerings, year after year, to the goddess whose file you have just read. And if that seems impossible to you, I think it is because we want the sky to be simpler than the ground. The women knew something. They lived in houses where the master's wrongs were paid for by servant girls. They lived under an arrangement they had not designed and could not leave. And when they looked up at their queen, blameless nowhere, trapped everywhere, magnificent anyway, I do not think they saw a monster or a saint. I think they saw the weather of their own lives, grown huge and crowned. You do not worship weather because it is kind. You worship it because it is real, and because it is over your house too, and because it also, sometimes, in its own furious way, keeps things alive. The queen's storms all blew downhill. That is the truth, and it stands. But there is one night in the record, one single night, when the storm turned and went up the mountain. One night when her anger finally aimed itself at the actual address, at the throne, at him. She did not go alone. Half the sky went with her, on tiptoe, in the dark, carrying rope. It is time I told you about the rebellion. Every household with a tyrant in it dreams the same dream. The Greeks knew it, and being Greeks, they were unafraid to dream it about heaven itself. The dream goes like this. What if he could be held, just once, not killed, nothing so large, only stopped, made to sit still, made to listen for one single hour without the power to end the conversation. Everyone who has ever lived under an untouchable power has had that dream at 3 a.m, and on the night this chapter happens, the Queen of the Gods decided to stop dreaming it. The oldest account of that night sits inside the Iliad itself, dropped in passing, the way you mention a family scandal everyone already knows. The plotters were not small. Hera led. Beside her came Poseidon, lord of the sea, the king's own brother, second power of the universe. And with them, in the telling we have, came Athena or Apollo, the king's own children. Read that list again. Wife, brother, children. This was no palace coup by outsiders. This was the household, the people at his own table, the ones who knew him best. And if you want a measurement of what living under Zeus was actually like, there it is, the inner circle, unanimous, in the dark, with rope, and it had to be at night, and it had to be in his sleep, because awake he was beyond all of them together. That was the arithmetic that ruled the sky. The thunderbolt outweighed everything, always, and the whole order of heaven rested on that one imbalance. So they came to his bed while he slept, the way you approach the only lion in the world, and they bound him. The old line says, They bound him with 100 knots. I love that the number survived. Not 10, not 20, 100. Whoever tied those knots kept tying long past the point of function, into the country of fury. Knot after knot after knot. Years of swallowed rage paid out through the hands into leather and cord. And when the 100th knot was set, the impossible thing was simply true. The king of the universe lay tied to his own bed and could not move. The accounts give us almost nothing of the next few minutes, and I have always thought the silence is the story. Picture them standing around the bed in the dark. The wife, the brother, the child, looking down at the unthinkable. He is awake now. He is testing the knots, and the knots are holding, and the thunder is out of reach. And for the first time since the fall of the Titans, the Master of Heaven is looking up at faces that do not have to flinch. What did she feel? In that one moment, the woman who had been swallowed by one king and married to another. The dream, actually happening. The conversation, finally possible. Whatever new order they meant to build. And the accounts never even tell us their plan. It lived for the length of that silence. It died because of loyalty. And the loyalty came from the sea. Thetis, a silver-footed goddess of the deep, saw what was happening and understood the one thing the plotters had refused to think about, which was the day after. A bound Zeus would not stay bound forever, and she went down into the deepest sea and found the one creature the knots meant nothing to. The old stories call him Briareus, one of the 100-handed ones, the ancient giants from the world's first days, beings so huge and so strange that even the gods kept them at the edge of things. Briareus owed Zeus an old debt. Thetis called it in. He came up out of the sea and into the palace, and he did not fight anyone, because he did not have to. He simply sat down beside the sleeping chamber, all 100 hands in view, and looked at the plotters. 100 knots is a long job for 4 gods. For a being with 100 hands, it is one motion. Every conspirator in that room did the same arithmetic at the same time, and the rebellion ended right there, without a blow. The knots undone, the king rising from the bed with the night's whole meaning already reorganizing itself in his face. The others scattered into excuses. Poseidon was too large to destroy, the children too useful. The king's fury, like his wife's, rolled toward the one place it could get traction. And this time, for once, uphill and downhill were the same direction. Hera, what he did to her was not done in private, and that was the point of it. He hung her in the open sky, golden chains at her wrists, and at each ankle an anvil, the great iron mass of a god's forge, dragging her body taut between heaven and the pit of the world. The Queen of Heaven, suspended in her own element, in front of everyone, gold and iron and gravity, turning slowly in the winds between the clouds, all night, in full view of every god in the palace. And here, the Iliad itself gives us the detail that turns the scene from cruelty into policy. The other gods watched. All of them. They crowded the halls. The accounts say, aching at the sight, muttering, furious, and every single one of them stayed exactly where it was safe, because the king had announced the price. Any god who tried to loose her would be seized and thrown from the ramparts of heaven. So the queen hung in the wind, and the whole sky stood at the windows and did nothing. And that tableau, the punished wife, the silent onlookers, the untouchable husband, was the true portrait of the rain, hung out at last where everyone could see it. One did not stay at the windows, and I have been saving him. There was a god in the palace with a crooked walk, the smith, the fireworker, the one who made the thrones, everyone else sat on. Hephaestus, her son, their son, born in the early years of the marriage, and the traditions about his childhood are dark and tangled, and some of them shame her. And tonight is not the night to sort them. Tonight, only one fact about him matters, and it comes straight from the oldest source we have. When Zeus punished Hera, the boy could not bear it. He came out from the windows. He crossed the hall. He tried to help his mother. His father took him by the foot and threw him off Olympus. He fell, the account says, an entire day, from morning to sunset, falling, the way a dropped thing falls through a dream. And he struck the island of Lemnos at evening, with almost no life left in him. And the people there gathered him up and tended him. He walked, crooked, ever after, the traditions say, or crooked worse than before, the god of the forge, the maker of wonders, carried in his own gait, every day of eternity. The price of the single most decent act anyone performed on that entire night. He was the one who tried, out of the whole watching sky. The lame smith was the only one who crossed the room, and it cost him a day of falling. And if you remember nothing else from this chapter, remember that her son did that, and that she watched it from the chains. Morning came, as it does. The accounts say the king offered release on terms, and the terms were an oath, sworn on everything binding, never to rise against him again. She swore it, hanging between two anvils, in front of the assembled family. The Queen of Heaven gave her word, and you know by now, better than anyone, what her word was worth once given. She was the goddess of the vow. It was the one currency she had never once debased, and he spent it against her, and it held. She never rebelled again. 4,000 years of stories, and there is no second attempt, no later conspiracy. Nothing. That night stands alone in the record. But do not misread her. Not this late in the story. Not after everything, you know. What ended that morning was a method. What replaced it is the rest of this tale. She came down from the chains, and she stood in the hall where everyone had watched, and she put the crown back on in front of the same eyes that had seen her hanging, which is its own kind of iron. And she took inventory of the world as it actually was. The direct road was closed. It had been sealed with gold and anvils and an oath, permanently, in public. Water, when the road is closed, does not argue with the mountain. It goes around. It goes under. It finds the crack, the seam, the soft ground, the long way that gets there, anyway. From that morning on, the queen fought like water. She would never again stand in front of the king. She would work beside him, beneath him, behind him, through channels, through favors, through beauty, through patience, through the fine print of oaths. And one day, on the plain of a burning city, you will watch her win an entire afternoon of a war without once raising her voice. And when you do, remember where she learnt it. She learnt it in the wind, between two anvils, watching her son fall. The palace settled. Eternity moved on, the way it does, with feasts and seasons and the slow traffic of prayers rising from the world below, and the years walked forward toward a certain summer day, and a certain guest list, and the one goddess in the universe. You should never leave off a guest list. There was going to be a wedding. Everyone was invited. Almost everyone. There is a kind of guest list that causes wars. Every culture on Earth knows the shape of it. The wedding where one relative was left out. The dinner party, missing one name. The christening in the old fairy tale where 12 fairies were invited and the 13th was not. And the 13th came anyway, carrying a gift nobody wanted. The Greeks got there first, and they told it biggest. And the party in question was the most spectacular wedding in the history of the universe. You already know the bride. Thetis, the silver-footed goddess of the sea, the one who saved Zeus from the 100 knots. Heaven owed her everything, and heaven paid its debt strangely, by marrying her to a mortal man, a good king named Peleus. The reasons run deep and dark. There was a prophecy that any son of Thetis would grow greater than his father, and the king of the gods, who had once wanted her for himself, heard that prophecy and did the arithmetic of his own survival and handed her down to a mortal instead. Even heaven's gratitude, you will notice, was managed like a risk. But the wedding itself, the wedding was glorious. It was held on the slopes of Mount Pelion, in the green shade above the sea, and everyone came. All 12 of the great gods came down the mountain with gifts. The muses sang. The fates themselves attended. Immortals and mortals sat at the same long tables for one golden afternoon, something that had almost never happened and would almost never happen again. And the poets looked back on that day, later, as the last perfect hour of the old world, the high water mark, the afternoon before everything, because somebody had gone through the guest list, name by name, and left one out. Eris, the goddess of discord, strife herself, sister of war, the spirit of every quarrel that ever split a family or a nation. And look, you can defend the decision. Who invites discord to a wedding? Every couple planning a reception since the beginning of time has understood the impulse perfectly. There is always someone who cannot be in the room without the room curdling. You leave them off the list, and you hope. Here is what the old story knows, and it is wiser than almost anything else the Greeks left us. Discord does not need an invitation. Discord attends anyway. The only choice you actually get is whether she arrives as a guest, seated and fed and flattered, or arrives as she chooses, on her own schedule, carrying her own gift. She waited for the golden hour of the feast, when the wine had gone around, and the singing was loud, and every immortal guard was down. Nobody saw her come. The first anyone knew of her was the gift itself, arcing in from the shadows at the edge of the light, thrown low and skillful, landing on the banquet table and rolling, wobbling. In that way, round things roll, slower and slower, past the cups, past the hands, until it stopped in the exact center of everything. An apple, a golden apple, and I do not have to tell you where it came from, because you have known that tree since its planting. The garden at the western edge of the world, the serpent that never sleeps, deep earth's wedding present to one particular bride on one particular day, the happiest gift of the happiest hour of her whole marriage. Eris had gone to Hera's own garden, to the tree from Hera's own wedding, and picked her weapon there, out of every object in the universe. Discord chose to arm herself with a piece of the Queen's wedding day, and then she threw it into the middle of a wedding. There were 3 words cut into the gold. The banquet leaned in and read them, and the singing died. For the fairest, that was the whole device. No blade, no poison, no curse, an unaddressed compliment. 3 words and no name, dropped into a room containing every proud immortal in existence. And then Discord withdrew into the dark and let the machine run, because she understood something about the divine heart, and about every heart. The deadliest weapon is not the insult. It is the prize with one winner. 3 goddesses reached the apple at the same moment. Athena, grey-eyed, goddess of wisdom and war, who was certain in her way. Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, who was certain in hers. And the Queen, and before you smile at the vanity of it, at 3 of the mightiest powers in the universe, contesting a piece of fruit like children, to look closer at what the apple actually was to the third hand on it. The other two were quarreling over a compliment. Hera was holding a piece of her own wedding, thrown into a party as a bomb, with a question carved on it that her whole marriage had been answering in the negative for centuries. Every affair, every nymph, every mortal girl in the ledger had been her husband's public answer to the question on that apple. For the fairest, the word was not a flattery to her. It was an old wound with gold poured over it. They took the quarrel to Zeus, naturally the judge of everything, and Zeus looked at his wife, and his daughter, and Aphrodite, and performed the single most relatable act of cowardice in all of mythology. He declined. No verdict from this bench. Instead, he pointed down the sky, far down, to the slopes of Mount Ida near the city of Troy, where a young man was watching a herd of cattle. "Him," said the king of the universe, "he will judge." His name was Paris. He was a prince of Troy, being raised as a herdsman. Owing to another prophecy, we will meet later. And on an ordinary afternoon on the mountainside, the light changed around him, and three goddesses in their full glory stood in the grass of his pasture, holding a golden apple and a question. Hermes explained the rules. The boy would look at the three greatest ladies of heaven and award the gold to one. The goddesses did not simply stand to be looked at. Each one, quietly, made the boy an offer, and the three offers, laid side by side, are a complete map of that world. So walk it slowly. Athena spoke of war. "Choose me," she said, "and I will make you unbeatable. Wisdom in council, victory in every battle, glory that generals dream about, the gift of winning for the rest of your life." Aphrodite spoke of desire. "Choose me, and I will give you the most beautiful woman in the world. Not a goddess, a mortal woman, the most beautiful one alive, for your own." She did not mention, or perhaps did not care, that the woman in question was already married, and already a queen, in a city called Sparta. And Hera spoke of thrones. "Choose me," she said, "and I will make you a king over kings, lordship of all Asia, the richest realm under the sun, cities and fleets and treasuries, power beyond any prince who ever lived." Stop on her offer, because after 14 chapters you can read it the way the boy could not. Athena offered what Athena was. Aphrodite offered what Aphrodite was. And Hera offered kingdoms, sovereignty, rule, because that is what she was, and had been since before the marriage, since before the king, since the old stones of Argos that remember her standing alone. She reached into herself for the greatest thing she had, and the greatest thing she had was thrones. It was the first gift anyone ever gave her. If the oldest guesses are right, it was the only thing she had ever fully owned. And the boy on the mountain weighed the three offers: power, victory, desire, the whole engine of human history laid out in the grass of a cow pasture. And he was young, and the afternoon was warm. He gave the apple to Aphrodite. There is a silence after that moment that the myths do not describe, and I have always thought it must have been very long, and very cold, and that the temperature on that mountainside dropped in a way the cattle felt before the boy did. Two goddesses turned away from a herdsman prince who had just, in a single motion, declined wisdom, declined sovereignty, and rated the Queen of Heaven second best or worse, publicly, on the record, forever. To Aphrodite, the judgment was a triumph. To Athena, an insult. To Hera, it was something with more history in it. Count what the apple had already been to her before the boy ever touched it. It was her wedding gift, stolen from her own garden. It was her husband's question, the one his whole reign kept asking and answering against her. And now it was a verdict, handed down by a mortal boy, that even with kingdoms in her open hand, she was not enough. She had stood on a mountainside once before, holding a small, shivering bird, and been chosen by deception. Now she stood on another mountainside and was not chosen at all. Paris went back to his cattle, and in time back to his city, to Troy of the high walls, the golden city of the east, rich and beautiful and doomed from that afternoon forward, though not one soul inside it knew, and Aphrodite kept her bargain, because gods keep bargains. That is the iron of this whole mythology. The most beautiful woman in the world was Helen, queen of Sparta, wife of Menelaus. In time, a Trojan prince would sail to Sparta as a guest, and sail home with his host's wife, and the ships would begin to gather, 1,000 of them. Eventually, you have seen those ships before, if you have traveled with us, waiting in a windless bay for a price to be paid. Tonight you finally know the accounting behind them. 1,000 ships, 10 years of war, the deaths of heroes whose names outlived their kingdoms, the burning of the greatest city of the age, all of it running back, ledger line by ledger line, to a wedding, a guest list, and a piece of golden fruit from the tree of Hera's happiest day. The Greeks put it in a proverb, eventually, an apple of discord, and the phrase is still in the dictionary. In English, tonight, one small golden thing in the middle of a table that everyone wants and only one can have. Every language in Europe kept some version of it, because every family, every office, every kingdom keeps meeting the apple again. On Olympus, the queen began, very quietly, to prepare. No storm, no declaration. She had learned her methods long ago, between two anvils, and her method now was water, patience, channels, alliance, the long way around. Troy had a wall no army could break, and inside her ledger it now had a debt no wall could keep out. She would not hurry. Water never hurries. But when the ships finally sailed, and the greatest war of the age caught fire on the plain below those walls, the soldiers on both sides would learn what the old world already knew, and what you now know better than any of them. The judgment of Paris had 3 judges in the end. The boy chose the goddess of love. The war would be decided by the 2 he refused. 10 years. Hold the number the way the Greeks held it, because it was the measure of the whole age. 10 years. The 1,000 ships lay on the beaches below Troy. 10 years the greatest army ever assembled threw itself at walls the gods themselves had built, and could not break them. Children born in the first spring of the siege were learning to throw spears by the last one. The war had become a country. Men had farms in it, graves in it, whole lifetimes. And above the war, invisible to the men bleeding in it, ran the other war. The gods had chosen sides the way families choose sides, bitterly, personally, and for reasons the soldiers below would never learn. Aphrodite stood over Troy, shielding the city of the prince who chose her. Apollo stood with her, and Ares, and against them, for the Greeks, stood the 2 goddesses refused on the mountainside. Athena, with her grey eyes narrowed, and the queen, Homer, who saw everything, saw this most clearly. Read the Iliad start to finish, and you will find that no god in it, none, hates like Hera hates. The others fight for favorites, for pride, for sport. Some afternoons they lose interest and drift away. She never loses interest. Her hatred of Troy is total, patient, administrative, at one point in the poem, and this stops readers cold even now. She offers Zeus a trade. If he will let her have Troy, he may destroy, whenever he wishes, any 3 cities she loves best on earth, and she names them, and one of them is Argos, her Argus, the hill with her oldest house on it, the plain of her own people, the city that had loved her longest of anyone in the world. She put Argos on the table. That is the exchange rate of a wounded queen. Measure it and shiver. And then remember, because you know her file now, that the wound was never really the apple. The apple was one afternoon. The wound was centuries deep. And Troy had simply, at last, given it an address that was not uphill. For 9 years the 2 wars ground on in stalemate. The human one and the heavenly one. Because the king of the gods held the balance. Zeus sat above the battle on the peaks of Mount Ida, the same mountain where the apple was judged, and from there he managed the war like weather. A Greek day here, a Trojan day there, keeping the scales level for reasons woven into fates and promises far above the bloodshed. As long as he watched, neither side could truly win. And in the 10th year, there came an afternoon when the Queen of Heaven looked down at the deadlock and looked across at her husband on his mountain and made a decision that the ancient world never stopped talking about. She could not fight him. That door was sealed with gold and anvils and an oath, and she had never once, you will remember, debased her word. She could not persuade him. 9 years of arguments in the halls of Olympus had moved him nothing. There was exactly one power in the universe that had ever been able to move Zeus. One force he had never in his existence resisted, and she had watched it defeat him, humiliatingly, publicly, from the day of her own courtship onward, in the arms of nymph, after princess, after queen, desire, his wanting, the one weather even the weather-maker could not forecast. So the Queen of Heaven went to her chamber, and the doors sealed behind her, and Homer gives us what happens next in loving, astonishing detail, because Homer knew exactly what this scene was. It is the only scene of its kind in the whole poem. A goddess arming for battle. Except the armory is a dressing table. She bathed and anointed herself with ambrosial oil, the deep perfume of heaven, the kind that filled the whole palace when the jar was opened. She combed and braided the shining hair, the robe woven by Athena's own hands, pinned with gold, the earrings, each with 3 drops trembling like berries, the sandals. Homer inventories it all, piece by piece, the way he inventories a hero's armor before a killing day. Breastplate, helmet, spear, because that is precisely what he means you to understand. She is arming. This is her panoply. The queen is going to war in the only armor her marriage ever left her. And then she did the thing that tells you she had thought all of it through like a general. She went to Aphrodite, to the enemy, to the goddess of the other side, the winner of the apple, the patron of Troy, and she asked her, sweetly, woman to woman, for a favor, not for the war. Of course, she spun a story, a lie as smooth as silk, about the old estranged couple who had fostered her, Oceanus and Tethys, and you know those names too. She reached for the one true tender thing in her past and used it as cover. They have quarreled, she said. They no longer share a bed. I want to reconcile them, and for that I need your power, the charm of love itself, to carry with me. And Aphrodite, flattered, outplayed, completely unaware she was arming the artillery that would be turned on her own front, unfastened from her breast the embroidered band in which all her power lived, desire and longing and the sweet persuasion that steals the wits of the wise, and handed it over. "Take it," she said. "Carry it against your heart." The queen tucked the borrowed heart of her enemy inside her robe, over her own, and went to find her husband. He was on the high peak of Ida, watching his war, and Homer says that when Zeus saw her coming toward him across the mountain top, desire mastered him on the sight, as strong as the first time, as strong as the golden cloud of the wedding. All those centuries ago, he forgot the battle below. He forgot the balance he was holding. The manager of the universe looked at his own wife of 1,000 years and lost his place in his own plan, and told her so, in a speech that manages to be tender and appalling at once. And they lay together there on the summit, and the mountain, the old poets say, put up a bed for them. Fresh grass sprang under them, dew-white clover, crocus and hyacinth, thick and soft, lifting them off the ground, and a golden cloud settled over the peak and sealed them in, the second golden cloud of their marriage, and warm drops fell glittering from it onto the earth. And inside that beauty, read the scene for what it is, because this is the saddest, magnificent thing in her whole story. The first golden cloud, on Samos, lasted 300 years and asked for nothing. It was, whatever came after, love. This one was an operation. Every gesture in it was planned in front of a mirror. The one afternoon in the entire Iliad where husband and wife hold each other is a military deception, timed to the minute, with the god of sleep himself bribed and waiting in a pine tree, disguised as a night bird, to seal the king's eyes the moment desire was spent. Sleep took him, and the moment the king's eyes closed, word flashed down from the mountain to the sea, to Poseidon, who had been waiting for exactly this, and the earth-shaker came roaring up the beaches at the head of the Greek line, and the whole deadlocked war lurched. The Trojans broke. Their greatest hero was struck down in the surf, carried from the field, spitting blood. The Greeks surged over the plain, and for one afternoon, one entire afternoon of the greatest war in history, the Queen of Heaven ruled the world from inside a stolen embrace, having defeated the master of gods and men with a perfume jar, a borrowed ribbon, and a lifetime of knowing exactly what he was. She had fought like water, the way she had promised herself in the chains, around, beneath, through the one crack in the mountain that had never once closed. He woke. Of course, the thunder came back into his face, and he looked down at his scattered war, and he understood everything in a single glance, and he turned on her, and in his rage he reminded her, Homer records it, of the golden chains, of the 2 anvils, of the day she hung in the wind. Have you forgotten? He asked her, what I am. And here is the measure of what she had become since that day. She did not defy him, and she did not grovel. She swore, carefully, on the head of the great oath, that Poseidon had acted on his own, that the sea god's charge was none of her sending, and the oath was, in the letter of it, true. She had sent no word to Poseidon. Sleep had, the god of sleep, whom she had bribed, had carried the message on his own wings. Her hands were clean because she had designed them clean. She had learned the fine print of vows from the man who spent his life escaping them. And now she stood in front of him, wrapped in technicalities, unpunishable. And he raged, and the rage found no handle on her anywhere. And the war rolled on. Troy fell in the end. You know that. It took the 10th year, and a wooden horse, and treacheries and heroisms beyond counting. And the Queen was there through all of it, pressing, always pressing, One steady, vengeful pressure on the scales for 10 years. And when the city finally burned, the fire was, by every accounting the ancients kept, as much hers as anyone's. The city of the boy who did not choose her went into the dark, its towers down, its name a synonym for ruin. And the proverb the Greeks made afterward gave the queen her due. The anger of Hera, they said, outlasts walls. But stand with me now above the burning, in the cold, high air where the gods stand, and look at the whole ledger of the war one last time, because there is a strange entry at the bottom, and it is the truest one. Ask what she won. Troy is ash, Paris is dead, and died badly. The insult of the apple is avenged in full, at the price of a generation of the age of heroes, Greek and Trojan alike, and rivers of grief on both sides of the sea. Her hatred is satisfied. Write that down, and then ask the only question this whole night has ever really been asking. What, in her own house, had changed? Nothing. The king is still the king. The marriage is still the marriage. Tomorrow there will be another nymph, another cloud parked on a hillside, another name for the ledger, and she knows it, standing above the firelight of the greatest victory of her existence. She could burn the richest city in the world for a slight. It burned. It changed nothing upstairs. The most powerful wife in the universe had proven, at the highest possible price, the size of what she could do, and the fire below was already teaching her, in its dying glow, the size of what she could not. She turned from the burning, the way she always turned, and went back up the long stairs, the crown level, the face composed, the file closed, and the myths, for Hera, grow quiet after Troy. The age of heroes was ending. The gods came down to walk among mortals, less and less, and the great stories dried up one by one like summer rivers. And you might think, closing the last epic, that her story simply stops there, on a balcony above a burned city. It does not stop. It goes underground, and it goes west, and it grows, because the myths were never where she actually lived. The myths were the gossip about her. Where she lived was the vow, the veil, the birthing room, the ordinary daylight promises of ordinary people, and that country was about to get bigger than any poet of Troy could have dreamed. There is a city rising in the west, on 7 hills, above a muddy river. It is small right now. It is nothing. A market town of shepherds and brick. It will own the world, and it will call her by a different name. Leave the myths now. Close the book on the age of heroes. Gently, the way you close a door on a sleeping house, and come forward with me into the ordinary world, into history, where the ground is real mud and the dates have numbers. It is late afternoon on the island of Samos, in our own century. You could be there next summer if you wanted. A warm wind is coming off the water, and the light is going honey-colored over a riverside meadow near the southern shore. And in the middle of that meadow, alone against the sky, stands a single marble column. One column. Tourists photograph it all day long. It is tall and pale and slightly ragged at the top, like a candle burned halfway down, and most of the people taking pictures of it could not tell you what it was. It is beautiful, and it is lonely, and it photographs well against the sunset, and that is enough for most of us, and there is no shame in that. But you have been traveling with me all night, so you know what it is. You knew the moment I said Samos. That column is all that remains standing of the Heraion, her great house, the temple, the historian Herodotus, a man who had walked through Egypt with his own feet and measured the pyramids with his own eyes, called one of the greatest building projects in all the Greek lands, More than 100 columns once stood where that one stands, a forest of marble, raised on the riverbank where the islanders said, "The Queen of Heaven was born." Beside a willow tree, the priests would point out to visitors. For centuries, pilgrims came across the sea to walk in that forest. Now the meadow is quiet, and the frogs sing in the river, and one column holds the whole memory up alone. Stand under it a moment, because this chapter is about what the stones remember that the stories forgot. The stories, you may have noticed, were never kind to her. The myths we have spent this night inside were written down. Most of them, men, for audiences that enjoyed a jealous queen, the way audiences have always enjoyed one. In the poems, she schemes and rages and loses. That is the Hera of literature. The Hera of the ground is someone else. And the ground does not lie, because the ground is just an accounting of where people actually walked, and what they actually carried, and what they were willing to build with their own hands and their own money on a hot hillside for 1,000 years. Go back to the mainland, to the hill above the plain of Argos, where we stood at the beginning of this story. Archaeologists, sifting the soil of her sanctuary, there have brought up the offerings of 40 generations, bronze pins and gold rings, ivory carvings, pottery by the ton, little clay figures of a seated queen, thousands of them, shaped by hand, fired in village kilns, carried up the hill by farmers and fishwives and brides. Kings sent tripods of bronze. Poor women sent apples from their own trees. You remember. And clay pomegranates. And woven cloth. Layer, under layer, under layer. 1,000 years deep. Of people climbing one hill to say thank you or please to one goddess. You do not get 1,000 years of that for a villain. Whatever the poets sang in the banquet halls, down in the houses, where the vows were actually kept and broken and kept again. She was needed. She was the address for the whole weight of married life, the guardian of the thing most people spent most of their lives inside. And they walked up her hill with their arms full, year after year, war after war, because the vow was real to them, and so was she. And once a year, at Argos, the whole city walked up together. The festival was called the Hera there too, and at the front of the great procession, the priestess of Hera rode in a cart drawn by white oxen, up the sacred road from the city to the temple, with all of Argos streaming behind her. Which brings me to the story I have been saving all night for this hillside. It is not a myth. Herodotus tells it as history, about real people, and it is one of the strangest and most quietly devastating stories the ancient world kept. And it belongs to her. There was a priestess of Hera at Argos who had 2 sons, young men named Cleobis and Biton. On the day of the great festival, the priestess had to be at the temple, 5 miles up the sacred road, at the appointed hour, and the oxen that drew her cart were late coming in from the fields. The hour came, the oxen did not, so her sons put themselves under the yoke, 2 young men, in the harness built for oxen, pulling their mother's cart with their own bodies, 5 miles, uphill, in the summer heat, through the dust, with the whole festival crowd watching, and then cheering, and then running alongside, all the way to the temple door. They arrived with the sacred schedule kept. The men of Argos crowded around the brothers, praising their strength. The women crowded around the mother, praising her sons, and the priestess, standing in front of the great image of the goddess she had served her whole life, overflowing with the kind of pride that is almost pain. Prayed out loud, she asked Hera to give her boys the best thing a human being can receive. The brothers, exhausted and happy, lay down in the cool of the temple to rest. The feast went on around them. The songs, the long golden evening, They never woke up. They died there, in her house, in their sleep, at the highest hour of their lives, loved by everyone, famous by sundown, their great deeds still warm. And the men of Argos, Herodotus says, had statues made of the two of them and sent to Delphi, as monuments of men who had been best. The Greeks told that story for centuries and argued about it the whole time, the way you may be arguing with it right now. Is that a gift? Is that the best thing a person can receive? To be taken at the summit, before the long descent, before the disappointments and the shrinking and the grief. The wise man Solon, in Herodotus, holds the story up as proof that no life can be called happy until it is finished. And a finished life at its peak is as close to happiness as mortals get. You do not have to agree with him. Half of Greece never did. But hear what the story says about her, because that is why it lives in this chapter. When the goddess of the whole long human haul, the vows, the marriages, the labors, the years, was asked point blank by her own priestess for the best thing she had. This is what she reached for. Rest. At the top. Sleep. In her house. With the cheering still echoing. She had watched 10,000 years of human lives grind through their middles and their ends. She knew exactly what she was sparing them. It is the gentlest thing in her entire file. And like everything gentle in her file, it is also cold to the touch. And the Greeks kept it because both of those things were true of her. And they knew it. One more stop before Rome. And it is the one I promised you would want. Down the coast from Argos, at Nauplia, the spring called Canathos still comes cold out of the rock. It rises today in the garden of a small convent, and the nuns will show it to you, and you remember what happened there. Once every year, for centuries, the image of the queen carried down from her temple, bathed in that water, and by that bath made new, whatever the year had been, whatever had been done to her, whatever the whole sky had watched, into the water, and out again, restored, whole, herself, the way she was at the very beginning. All night long you have watched what her years contained, the cloud over the meadow, the 9 days on the beach, the nursery, the madness, the chains and the anvils, the apple, the fire of Troy. Now stand at the spring with the women of Argos and watch them carry their queen down to the water, year after year after year, and understand at last what they were doing, because they knew her file better than you do. They sang it at their own festivals. They were not washing a statue. They were keeping her alive. They had built into her worship, with their own hands, the one mercy her marriage never offered her, a way to begin again, and she took it, every year of the ancient world. The queen went into the cold water, carrying everything, and came out carrying nothing, and put the crown back on. People who have never been hurt do not invent a ritual like that. The women of Argos knew exactly which goddess they had, and they gave her, once a year, the gift the myths never would. The light is nearly gone off the single column now. The frogs are loud in the river. The last tourists are walking back to their cars. And far to the west, across 2 seas, a muddy market town on 7 hills has been growing while we stood here. Rome is coming, and Rome does not find her the way it finds the other gods, imported in the baggage of Greek tutors, translated and fitted and renamed. Rome walks into its own oldest hills and finds her already there, waiting, under another name she has been wearing, in Italy, all along. It is a summer night in the year 390 before the Common Era, and the city of Rome is about to die. The Gauls have come down out of the north, a whole people on the move. and they have already broken the Roman army at a river called the Allia and poured through the city gates. Rome, the young Rome, the Rome that has not yet conquered anyone you have heard of, is burning street by street. What is left of her fighting men has retreated up the one place left, the Capitoline Hill, the steep rock at the heart of the city, where the great temples stand. They are besieged there, starving slowly, holding the last acre of Rome. And on this particular night, the Gauls have found a way up. There is a cliff path, so steep the Romans barely guard it, and in the dark, the Gallic warriors are climbing it in silence, hand over hand, weapons slung, so quietly that the accounts insist not even the dogs woke. The dogs, who exist to hear things in the dark, heard nothing. The sentries slept. The last hill of Rome lay open, and the men climbing toward it were minutes from ending the whole story before it began. No republic, no empire, no roads, no legions, no Latin on the lips of half the world. All of it hung on the silence of one summer night. But at the top of that cliff stood a temple, and in that temple lived a flock of geese. They were her geese, sacred to Juno, kept in her sanctuary, fed at her altar even now, even in the famine, because starving Rome would not eat the queen's birds. And geese are not dogs. Geese trust nothing, forgive nothing, and sleep, as anyone who has ever kept them will tell you. With one eye on the whole world, something moved on the cliff edge in the dark. The geese went off like alarms, honking, shrieking, beating their wings. A white uproar in the queen's courtyard, and a soldier named Marcus Manlius came up out of sleep with his sword already moving, reached the cliff edge as the first Gaul pulled himself over it, and threw him back onto the climbers below. And then the whole garrison was awake, and the path was held, and Rome, by the width of a goose's temper, lived. The Romans never forgot it. They were not a people who forgot debts, in either direction. From that night forward, the goddess of that temple carried a new title, Juno Moneta, and the Romans themselves explained the name from a Latin word meaning to warn. Juno, the warner. Juno, who gives the alarm. The queen who sees what is coming in the dark and says so, loudly, in time. Hold that name, Moneta. You are about to watch it travel 23 centuries into your own pocket, because some generations later, when Rome had grown into the Rome, you know, the city needed a secure place for a new and delicate operation. The striking of silver coins. They chose the safest, most watched, most sacred place on the Capitoline, the temple of the goddess who warned, the house of Juno Moneta. The mint of Rome operated inside her sanctuary. Coins were literally born in the queen's house, under the queen's eyes. And so the coins took her name. Money struck in the house of Moneta was called, in the language of the empire, moneta. Say it out loud, slowly, and listen to it change. Moneta. In Old French it softened into money. In English it landed as money. The word in your wallet. The word on your banking app. The word half the world worries about while it falls asleep at night. Is her temple title, worn smooth by 23 centuries of hands, like a coin, and the machine that strikes coins kept the older form even more clearly. We call it the mint, moneta. Mint, money, every dollar, every euro, every coin you have ever touched carries, folded invisibly into its name, a flock of geese screaming in the dark, and a queen who warned a city in time. And I want you to notice what kind of thing a coin is, because the Romans certainly did. A coin is a promise. It is worth nothing in itself. a disk of metal you cannot eat or wear. Its entire value is a vow, stamped and witnessed, that everyone agrees to keep. The Romans took the most promise-shaped object in human civilization, and they minted it in the house of the goddess of promises. And I honestly do not know if they did it on purpose. And it does not matter, because it is perfect either way. 4,000 years of guarding vows. And her longest-lasting temple turned out to be the idea of currency itself. Every purchase you have ever made was, in the oldest accounting, an oath sworn in her house. She was everywhere in Rome like that, load-bearing and half invisible. The Romans had known her long before they ever read a Greek poem. She was old Italian, a great goddess of the hill towns, guardian of women's lives. And when Rome met Greece and the two skies were laid side by side, Juno and Hera slid together like two prints of the same photograph. Every Roman bride at every Roman wedding was married under her protection. Armies swore by her. The month the Romans held sacred to her. The month of the year's turning when the light stands longest. They called Junius. The month of Juno. You call it June. And you still marry in it. Ask any wedding planner in America which month is booked out first. Ask any June bride, why June? And you will hear something about the weather, about the roses, about tradition. The tradition has a name. June weddings are Juno's weddings. The Queen's month, claiming the Queen's business. 20 centuries after the last incense burned on the Capitoline, somewhere this June, this coming June, in every city on earth, a veil is going to be lifted from a young face in front of two families, and the room will go quiet the way it always goes quiet, and not one person present will know whose month they are standing in, and it will not matter at all, because she was never in the worship for the credit. The temples closed. In time, they closed on her the way they closed on all of them. The fires banked, the doors barred, the statues carried off to museums, and the old gods settled into books. And you might think, again, that this is finally where her story ends, on a library shelf, in the footnotes, in the names of a month and a coin. Come forward with me instead, all the way forward, to the 5th of August, in the year 2011, to a stretch of Florida coastline you have visited with me before. At the end of another story, there is a rocket standing on that coast in the summer haze, white as a temple column, and inside its nose cone is a spacecraft the size of a basketball court, folded up like a moth, with 3 great solar wings waiting to open. Its destination is Jupiter, the largest planet in the sky, the king of planets, a ball of storm, 1,000 times the size of the Earth, wrapped in clouds hundreds of miles deep, and its mission, printed in the official documents, in the dry language of engineers, is this: to see beneath the clouds. Jupiter hides its true nature, its deep structure, its violent heart, under that beautiful banded veil, and no instrument had ever truly seen through it. And this machine was built to be the one that finally looks. NASA held a naming process, as NASA does, and the name they chose, and the mythology they cited, in public, on purpose, in the official mission literature, was this: in the old stories, Jupiter drew a veil of cloud around himself to hide his mischief, and his wife, the goddess Juno, was the only one who could see through the clouds and find out what he was really doing. They named the spacecraft Juno, and so, on that August morning, with a sound like the sky tearing, the Queen of Heaven went back to work, 5 years falling across the dark, 2 billion miles, and then the long burn into orbit around the king himself. And there she has been, ever since. Sweeping around him, pole to pole, closer than any machine has ever dared. Her instruments staring down through the cloud tops, through the lightning, through the veils, mapping what he hides. Every 53 days she dives in low over the storms and looks, and radios home what she finds. The water in him, the heat in him, the strange dilute core of him, discovered by her, unknown to science, until she looked. 4,000 years of this exact marriage, and here it still is, running on solar power. He hide. She finds out. Only now she publishes. And there is one more detail, and it is my favorite fact in this entire night. And it is true, and you can look it up tomorrow, bolted to the deck of that spacecraft, riding through the radiation storms of Jupiter right now. Tonight, while you are lying there, are 3 small aluminum figurines, made by the Lego company in partnership with NASA, to get children interested in the mission. 3 little figures, 2 inches tall. One is Jupiter, holding his lightning bolt. One is Galileo, holding his telescope, the man who first saw the truth about Jupiter from below. And one is Juno, the queen herself, in aluminum, 2 inches of her. And in her hand, the designers placed a magnifying glass. The Queen of Heaven is orbiting her husband at this moment, holding a magnifying glass, in a toy's steady hand, above the biggest storm in the solar system. Somewhere tonight her cameras are looking down through his clouds, and the data is streaming home across 500 million miles. And after everything you have heard tonight, every cloud parked over every meadow, every borrowed face, every midnight in the ledger, tell me the universe does not have a sense of humor, and a long memory, and something that looks, from a certain angle, almost like justice. Her month is on your calendar. Her name is inside your money. Her mission is above the clouds of Jupiter, funded and flying. And none of that, none of it, is where she actually lives. You know where she lives. You have known since the lamplit room at the beginning of the night. It is time to go back to the palace, one last time, and say good night to the Queen. Come up the long stairs one last time. The palace is quiet at this hour. Whatever hour means in a place like this. This is the deep of it. The hall's empty. The feast tables cleared. The torches banked low along the walls. Walk the corridor you have walked all night. Past the tall doors. Past the balcony, where she once stood for months, watching one small boat crawl across a dark sea. And come into the throne room itself. And stop. And look. 2 thrones stand at the end of the hall. Look at his first. Tall. Gold. Magnificent. The seat of the master of everything. It is empty. Of course it is empty. He is somewhere, the way he was always somewhere, and the room has long since stopped asking where. The throne of the King of the universe sits at the top of the world, gathering the quiet, and the strange truth you can only see at this hour is that it was empty most of the time. His power lived everywhere. It never really lived here. Now look at hers. She is in it. She was always in it. 4,000 years of stories. And through every single one of them. Through the cloud, over the meadow, and the fire in Thebes. Through the nursery serpents and the labors. Through the chains and the anvils and the apple and the 10 years of Troy. If you came to this room and looked, this is what you found. The Queen, on her throne, crowned, composed, present. The stories swirled out there in the world. She held the center. Somebody had to. Tonight, at the end of everything, she is not holding court, and she is not watching the world below. She is simply sitting in the deep quiet of her own house, and the lamplight is moving a little on the gold of the crown. and we can stand here at the doors, you and I, and finally say out loud what all of this was. You remember? Hours ago, in another life of the evening, I told you there was another goddess in this family, and another answer. One goddess in this story asked, at 3 years old, sitting on her father's knee, to live outside every wall in the world. No marriage, no household, no doors closing around her. The mountains for a kingdom and the wild for a family. You have heard her story. Some of you, on another night. She kept herself whole, entirely whole, forever, and paid for it in a coin of solitude. Every love in her life scheduled to leave. This goddess is the other answer to the same question. She went inside the walls, all the way inside, to the innermost room, the marriage at the top of the world, and she stayed. And the walls did to her everything walls can do. She was deceived at the threshold, betrayed within it, humiliated in front of the household, chained to the architecture itself, and she paid for it in the opposite coin. She lost pieces of herself, over and over, publicly, for centuries, and every year, at a cold spring near Argos, she got them back. That was Canathos. You understand it fully now. Here at the end, in a way you could not, in the middle, the women of her oldest city built her a door out that was not a door out, a way to stay and still survive the staying, down to the water carrying everything, up from the water carrying nothing, and the crown goes back on. The huntress never needed such a ritual. You only need to be made new if you have spent yourself. The queen spent herself every single year of the ancient world, on a marriage, on a family, on a kingdom that gave her back almost nothing. And every single year she went down to the water and decided, again, to be Hera. That is the fact the jealous wife stories never found room for. Nobody made her stay. Sit with that, because it is the whole ending. She was not a mortal woman in a mortal house with no roads out. She was one of the 6 eldest powers of the universe. She had thrones before him. If the old stones tell it true, she had Argus. She had Samus. She had the love of half the earth and the fear of all of it. At any hour of any century she could have walked down those stairs and out of this palace and set up her own sky. And no power in existence could have stopped her. And she knew it. And he knew it too. She never went. And you can spend a lifetime deciding what that means. People have, whole libraries have. But tonight, in the quiet, let the simplest reading have its turn. She was the goddess of the vow, not of the wedding. You remember, weddings are a day. She was the goddess of what comes after, the long haul, the for worse, the years that test the words, and a vow that only binds you while it is easy is not a vow at all. It is a mood, somewhere in the deep grammar of the universe. The promise itself needed one keeper who knew the full price of keeping, and she took the post, and she held it, and she never once pretended it did not cost. The Greeks understood this better than the poets let on. You have seen the proof all night. They did not pray about their marriages to the goddess of love. Love was for the beginning, when the beginning was over, when the household was real, and the years were long, and the promise had weight on it. They climbed the hill at Argos to the one power in the sky who knew, who had stood in the room where the vow gets hard, and stayed in the room. 40 generations of offerings do not lie. She was not worshipped in spite of her marriage. She was worshipped because of it, because she was the only one up there who understood. Her 3 names said it all along. Bais, the girl, before the veil, Tilea, the fulfilled, the wife, and Hera, the woman alone, girl, wife, Vido, the whole arc of a woman's life held in one being, And here at the end, you can see why it had to be all three. She had been each of them. The girl on the mountainside in the rain, holding a shivering bird. The bride, inside the golden cloud. 300 years of it. And it was real. And the woman alone in a crowded palace. Alone at the railing. Alone between two anvils. Alone on this throne in the lamplight. Wearing all three names at once. Which was the truest thing about her. Because that is how lives actually work. You do not trade oneself for the next. You carry all of them. Stacked. Forever. Somewhere far below this room. The world she guarded is still running. It is June down there. Some June. Every June. In a garden in Ohio. In a courtyard in Mexico City. In a rented hall in Seoul. Two people are standing up in front of everyone they know. And the room is going quiet. And the old words are being said. For better. For worse. A veil is lifted from a face. And two families watch it happen. And nobody in the room knows they are standing in her month. Performing her gesture. And it does not matter at all. And it never did. The coin paying for the flowers has her temple folded into its name. The promise being made has her whole biography folded into its meaning. And in the dark, above all of it, out, past the weather, past the moon, a small solar-powered spacecraft is banking around the king of planets. Cameras down, still looking through his clouds, still radioing home the truth. Her month, her Wort, her mission, her ancient job, everywhere, still staffed, and one house in the old marriage stories. One, still standing after all of them. Think of everything you saw fall tonight. Troy fell. The heroes fell. The temples fell. The empire fell. The very gods went into the books, one by one. Every great thing in this story ended except the thing that was breaking the whole time. The marriage at the top of the world outlasted the world it topped. It should have shattered in the first century of itself. And it buried everything else instead. And if you want to know what she got for staying, that is the answer the record gives. Nothing ended on her watch. She was the reason there was still a family up there at all. Still a table. Still a center. He was the power of the house. She was the reason it was a house. The old couple who raised her. Out at the edge of the world. The faithful ones. Oceanus and Tethys. They had shown her once what a good marriage looks like. Calm water. Kept promises. She spent 4,000 years married to the storm instead. And here is the quiet thing I have been saving for last. The thing the whole night has been carrying. She turned out to be the faithful one. In the entire record. 4,000 years deep. Every broken vow in that marriage broke on his side. Every single one. Search the accounts yourself someday. The Queen of Heaven. With every reason the universe could invent. With eternity to work in. Never once broke hers. The goddess of the promise kept the promise. That is not a small thing to be able to say about anyone. God or mortal. At the end of the whole story. It might be the largest thing there is. The lamp flames are standing very still now. The peacocks are asleep in the courtyard, their 100 eyes folded away for the night. The watchman resting at last inside the feathers. The golden apples are glowing quietly in the garden at the western edge of everything. Back on their tree. Guarded. Home. Far in the north. A bear is circling the pole star. Never setting. And the queen knows she is there. And that is a weight she carries too. One of many. And she carries them. And the throne beside her is empty. And hers is not. That is the last picture of the whole night. So, hold it as you drift. Not the jealous wife. Not the villain of somebody else's stories. A queen alone in the lamplight at the top of the world. Upright. crowned, awake, keeping a house that never once kept her, because she said she would. Because somebody in this universe has to be what a promise looks like when it is kept anyway. It was never going to be him. It was always going to be her. Sleep now. The palace is quiet. The geese are watching the dark, and the queen is on her throne. She never left.